Good morning, everybody. We are ready to get started today. Again, if you have run into any of the installation issues or anything with the setup that we've made, we will be going over this again later when we're setting up our Cherry Pie poll application. Okay, so there'll be plenty of time to redress them. And to start off today, we're going to talk a little bit about Python, why Python, and get to know some Python data types and some basic Python functionality. We'll definitely have plenty of time to go over those. Either during the break, you can call me or Sandy over, or we'll get to them when we do the installation.
Sounds good. So I'm Sandy. Actually, let's just start the slides here.
Thanks for joining us here today. We're excited you're here. We know it's early.
Yeah, and it's the first day tutorial, so that's kind of cool. So my name is Alexandra Cheung. I go by Sandy. I'm a systems engineer at DreamHost. I do a lot of Python education stuff. I recently started teaching high schoolers at a nonprofit in LA. Also, I've been involved with PyLadies, and I do some one-on-one tutoring with friends as well.
I'm Katharine Jarmul. I'm KJam on Twitter and a bunch of other places. I'm Director of Technology at Hyphen. It's an agency based in South Bay in Hermosa Beach, California. I call myself a Pythonista and a Jangsta. And I'm also involved in PyLadies. We're both some of the founding members.
So, who are you guys? You're an audience, I believe, of Py-curious computer programmers with beginning to intermediate experience in the language of your choice, and some rudimentary understanding of your operating system's command line. If you have never programmed before, this tutorial is probably not for you. It's going to be pretty fast-paced. We have a lot of material to cover. So yeah, just be aware of that. How many people here have ever played with Python before? Okay, for like more than 6 months, more than a year? Okay, so it's kind of new, but definitely Py-curious. Awesome. So this is a URL to the tutorial slides so that you can kind of follow along as at your pace here, in case you get a little behind or ahead. I would recommend, once these load up, I'd recommend saving them as a PDF, just because internet may or may not be consistently good for the 3-hour duration. So I'll give you guys a little bit. I tried to make it as easy as I could, so I did a bit.ly URL. Those Google Docs URLs are not fun to write. So. All right. I'm going to go ahead and switch slides now. Does anyone not have the... Okay, a couple more seconds. Okay. Are we all good with the bit.ly URL? Looks like it. Awesome. Oh, sorry. You got it? Okay. All right. So I'm going to start out talking a little bit about Python history. I'm sure a lot of you guys know it was created by Guido van Rossum in the late 80s. He's the benevolent dictator for life, and he works at Google now. And it's named after IPython, which is kind of fun. I mean, I've seen a couple. Yes? Oh, yeah. He does now, really?
He just switched, yeah. I was going to say that.
Slides outdated. Anyway, well, I'm sure he's still really awesome. Okay, so Dropbox, that's interesting. So why Python? Why do we love Python so much? It's a really fun language to work with. It's really quick to get started. You can very quickly and easily start doing some pretty powerful things with it. The code is really clean and modular. And the Python community is really prides itself on writing clean, elegant code. And that's something I really appreciate about the community that I haven't observed to the same degree in a lot of other communities. I love working with Python code. I don't do it as much as I used to, though. White space enforcement is also very nice because you actually have to follow some sort of guideline or your program won't even work. Versus, a lot of languages you can kind of write the code however you feel like it, and
it will either fail silently or it will still parse properly.
Yeah, exactly. Has an extensive standard library, lots of really great modules, saves you a lot of time, minimal boilerplate code writing, very dry, right? Don't repeat yourself is kind of the motto. It's cross-platform, and it has a great community. So this is an XKCD comic. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this before. I haven't seen it in a while, actually, but it's pretty. I love XKCD and Python, so. Print Hello World. Yeah, I forget the number. Do you remember the number of this one? So you can go look it up.
393?
393.
When we talked about it last night? It was 393.
Yeah.
So somewhere in there, it's 390 something.
So who's using Python? A ton of shops. Google, obviously, Reddit, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, DreamHost, YouTube, BitTorrent, Dropbox, and you could go on and on. Disney, I know, uses it. Tons of people. So why are we doing this tutorial as a project? I think that the best way to learn something is to get your hands dirty, get in there and actually build something practical as though you were maybe had an assignment at work, but you had to get something done and you had to use a new technology to do it. And it's great when we get those opportunities at work, but they're not necessarily as frequent as a learning environment like at a conference. And so at the end of this tutorial, you'll actually have a fun app that you have built from the ground up and that you can continue working on if you choose.
Yeah, we're actually going to give you some application homework, some things that the app has left unfinished that you can do yourself. So this tutorial can continue at home. And of course, we're always available if you want to ping us on Twitter or Freenode. We're usually around somewhere.
Yeah. Meh. My slides just freeze. That's awesome. Oh, we did download the PDF.
How does it work?
I don't know. Let's see if we can do manual search. There we go. Okay. So does anyone have any questions so far just about Python or any concerns about the tutorial? Just kind of I know we haven't said a whole lot about it, but I just want to give anybody an opportunity to just general questions so far. Anyone? Yes.
How does it stand, when Java is there and Perl is there and so many other languages are there? What's so special about Python? When Java is, C is there and C++ is there.
So what's so special about Python?
Yeah.
Well, what's so special about Java? I think that Python, with dynamic typing languages and with languages that do have kind of the speed of development and the amount of open source contributors that Python has, it's definitely a rapidly evolving language, just even in the time that it has been around, right? I think the fact that large companies like Google, YouTube, Reddit, et cetera, are making investments in the language shows that it definitely, has merits, right? And it has a future as a language. So I think, obviously, there's language evangelists in every language, right? And I don't see myself as somebody that's like Python's the only way.
Yeah, you said use the best tool for the job.
Yeah, it's always the best tool for the job, right? But I think within not only the math and science community, but also the web development community, Python definitely has a large group of really intelligent, really brilliant open source contributors. And so I think it's worthwhile to be involved in those projects and to learn from people like that and to be able to work with libraries that talented people have put together.
Awesome. So, and I think I'm gonna have to, there it goes, just a little sluggish. So I would like to do a quick introduction to our project and a quick tour of Python basics just so that you guys know a few fundamentals that will make the project more meaningful as we go through the actual application code. So our libraries that we chose today to build our app, at the core of our app, are CherryPy and Jinja 2. And Katharine, these are two technologies or two libraries that you've worked with before.
Yes, yeah, we've used CherryPy at several places that I've worked at. It's really lightweight and easy to use framework. It has a direct WSGI interface. We don't actually really touch on a lot of the WSGI interface right now, but it's pretty easy if you look through the documentation, or if you want to ping us later on getting it interfacing with Nginx or Apache or whatever it is your server of choice. And it's fun to learn new things, and we know you've all used Django or Flask. That's kind of a joke, but I mean, Django and Flask are kind of, I feel like, some of the most well-known ones, and I feel like it's always fun to try something new that maybe not even anybody you know has tried before. And CherryPy, you know, has a good community of random people using it to build pretty interesting things. So if you start to look around at CherryPy projects, you might be intrigued. Jinja 2 is a really commonly used Python templating language. It is one of, I think, the fastest Python templating languages in terms of benchmarking. It's easy to grok the syntax, so it's really easy to look at Jinja 2 templates and kind of begin to understand what's happening. And it integrates with many Python libraries. So you can use Jinja 2 with Django, you can use Jinja 2 with Flask, you can use Jinja 2 with pretty much most Python frameworks I've ever come across.
So it's very portable.
Yeah.
Cool. So the initial environment setup, which you guys should have probably already have this done and ready to go, are our three libraries, which are all pip installs: IPython, Jinja 2, and CherryPy, which we've talked about those other two. We have not talked about IPython yet. I think we will soon.
Yes.
But before we do that, there's a couple important additions, which some of you guys who were here earlier saw our slide on the projector, or on the screen, of pylibmc and memcache. So these things need to be installed on your laptops in order for you to really, play around with the app once it's done, I guess is the right way of putting it. It doesn't prevent you from building the app at all, but from actually playing with it, you'll need to have those installed. If you can't get them installed or running into a lot of errors, the tutorial's a pretty tight timeline. This isn't really going to come into play until the end of the tutorial, where if you don't have one of these things installed, something's not going to work right. So what I would suggest is probably at that point, when we get to sort of, hey, let's see how our app looks in the browser, kind of look over your friend's shoulder or your neighbor's shoulder and say, hey, can I take a peek at that, play with it for a second, and just know that you will get there as soon as the library is installed. And then we can have some time after the tutorial's over, if anyone wants to stick around, help get those issues resolved.
Yeah, and again, we do have about halfway through the tutorial, at about 10:30, we'll be taking a short break for people to use the restroom and get up and move your legs, those types of things. So if you have had any installation issues with these things, please, stick around during that time, and Sandy or I can help you with your installation.
And just out of curiosity, how many people here have not been able to install memcache? Okay. How many people here have not been able to install pylibmc? Okay, so probably about 20 people total, looks like, maybe-ish. Okay. So I apologize, you guys, for the change in library requirements. We'll work with you to get those resolved. And this will be coming to play later. There's potentially some issues with, I ran into this actually when I was setting this up on my computer, and so I have a few notes on it if we run into this, but it's not worth going over right now. And we already did that, so I'm ahead of schedule, look at that. Awesome. Okay, so IPython, and Katharine, I know you're a big fan of IPython, so.
I'm a huge fan of IPython, and let me just say why. So most of the time, when you're debugging a program, you may or may not be trying to use PDB or other debuggers, profilers even, to figure out what's going on with your code. But IPython is essentially an interactive Python console. So when you just type Python, hopefully everybody here has Python installed, you'll get a Python console prompt. But that prompt doesn't really have a lot going on. But when you, so we can give an example here.
Yeah.
So when you just type
you guys
Python,
have all seen this, but
this is the prompt that you get, and it's fine. It of course interprets Python properly, but it's not as helpful. However, when you use IPython, you get a lot of different helpful tools that can help you debug what's going on with your program, why your function isn't working, why this variable is not returning the value that you wish for it to have. And it also has a lot of little tricks, like namespace tricks, debugging tricks, that can help you integrate new libraries into your knowledge base and learn new things really quickly. One of the first things I do when I install a new library is I fire up IPython, I import that library, and I start looking through the documentation in the interactive console. So we'll go over a couple tools and tricks of the trade of IPython, and hopefully you can find it as helpful as I have found it in terms of learning Python and becoming a better Python developer. So when you're in IPython, if you want to import a library,
You use the Control tab to get to the terminal.
Control tab or Command tab? Okay.
Sorry, Mac keys confuse me
Okay,
sometimes.
so let's just say we want to look at datetime, right? Datetime is a Python library for working with dates and those things. And let's just use the question mark operator, okay? So the question mark operator is going to tell you, okay, the datetime is a module, right? And it's going to tell you where it is, and it's going to tell you that any doc strings attached to it. So, okay, that's cool. So let's just try this. Okay, so foo is 2, right? We don't really have a lot of space here, but essentially what this is saying is it's an integer, right? You can convert, how you can convert different things, okay? So let's import time. Okay, so we can start seeing the ins and outs, and then let's use this again. So again, you can start to see that there's different types, right? That the question mark operator is going to show you kind of what those things are and any document strings that they can help you use to understand what's going on with the different namespaces that you have, the different variables that you have, and the different libraries that you're using. So I'm a big proponent of just starting to look around the documentation in an interactive way.
And yeah, you don't get any of this niceness with the standard Python interpreter, which I'm sure you guys have probably played with and seen that that's the case.
So one of the other operators that is nice to have is the who. So it's a percent and then who. And what that's going to do is it's going to show you what is in your namespace. And by that I mean it's showing you what the console knows is there. So this is especially helpful if, say, you're trying to debug a program that you have running, and let's say you're importing a bunch of the different views or controllers or other things that are happening with your program, and you're forgetting, what it's aware of, what it isn't aware of, or you want to start debugging and you need kind of a list of where to begin. I often use that to help me find how things are. And the who with the S at the end will also then give you type and data information of your namespace. So those are, again, really, really helpful things that when you're in the middle of debugging and you're like, what is going on with my program? These are good commands to just run and kind of get an awareness of, kind of where you are in the process of debugging and what's around for you to work with. I also find it incredibly helpful if, like, let's say, never do this in your program, but it's okay to do this in IPython. So I just imported star from something that just imports all of
the things.
All of the things. But when you're first getting to know a library, I like to run something like this, and it starts to give me an idea of what is available within that module, okay? So you can start to get to know, okay, it looks like there's time, which appears to be a module of datetime, time delta, which is another module, tzinfo. And yeah, you can pull up the Python documentation and look through all these, but I'm kind of like a touch and play with it learner, and I like to poke at things and see how they work. And so for me, this works pretty well to get that going. There's also a history command, which will show you kind of the last things that you've run. That's helpful if you're trying to figure out why exactly the variable that you're talking to is not responding how you wanted it to. Maybe you accidentally set it to something that you didn't realize you did. Or sometimes it's just interesting to look through what you've been working on. And if you want it to run, how many people here are familiar with PDB or the Python debugger? Okay, so PDB is a really great tool in Python, and we use it a lot in debugging. Essentially, it's a module that allows you, it's a library.
It's part of the standard library.
Yeah, okay. That allows you to have an interactive debugger at your fail point within your Python application. So when an exception is thrown or something, an error is raised, you can go directly into an interactive mode and kind of do some things to look at what the variables are there, why is it failing. You're literally at that line in the code.
You're inspecting the code that you're currently, and it sets there's a lot of things you can do with PDB, but the thing I use it most commonly for is to set a breakpoint in my code and then execute the code, and then, you know, whether it's in my development server, pulls up PDB, or if it's in the interpreter, hangs at the breakpoint, and I can then inspect the code that I'm at, and it'll show me where I'm at, and I can step into other functions and inspect a lot of things that I'm not able to without debugging code, obviously. So, and we actually do later on when we get the app built, there's a little bit of PDB study. So I don't know are you guys playing along in IPython? Yeah, awesome. The best way to learn these things is to just get in there and practice it yourself and get a feel for it.
So as you can see, I wrote a function called foo where I divided by 1 by 0, which Python gets mad at, as all good libraries should, or all good languages should. I had run modulo PDB to tell IPython, hey, I want to go into interactive PDB debugging. And so at this point in time, I mean, I haven't set up any variables, but I could see, actually, sorry, I'm on PDB.
Did you set up PDB before you defined foo, or?
Yeah, okay. So essentially,
this is when I usually wake up, by the way, and then I go to sleep for like another hour.
But essentially, you can use that to then step through, and as you can see, I press N to step to the next line, but my function didn't have any more. So essentially, I highly recommend becoming familiar with PDB. I highly recommend becoming familiar with IPython. They're going to help you in the long run to become a better Python developer and to learn all of the libraries that Python has to offer you. And I also included some really cool documentation on different methods in IPython. I showed you my favorites. But there's a whole lot more that IPython makes available. So I would highly recommend at a later date checking out this guy's blog at Cornell and looking through some of the computational things that he has using IPython.
Cool.
Does anybody have, oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, so just to kind of sum up IPython, it's really just a gussied up version of the standard Python interpreter. It's got more bells and whistles and cool features, and that's why we love it. So Python is an interpreted language. This means that the interpreter executes the code directly, statement by statement. You can compare it to a compiled language like C. You know, the difference is, you know, C actually has to be translated into lower level machine language executable before we can do anything with it, right? So while this is really convenient for programmers, it, you know, generally is more, you know, I mean, the code's not as, it doesn't run as fast, right? We don't have the lower level executable to bank off of. We're actually executing Python statements as we go. So just interesting to note. So I want to go ahead and get into actual playing with Python. So I'm going to go through a lot of Python basics over the next little bit here, and if you guys could open your IPython terminals and play along with my examples, that would be great learning experience, because I'm sure, as you know, with other languages you've studied, the way that you get good at this stuff is by practicing and repeating and practicing and repeating and until it's boring and you can do it in your sleep and then it sticks. So integers, strings, lists, tuples, and dictionaries. These are the sorts of objects that we will be dealing with today when we build our application. So they are the things that I would like to introduce you to. So integers in basic math, nothing shocking here, right? Addition, division, exponents, modulus operator. So, I don't really think this is necessarily, I did this all in IPython. But I think we probably know these things.
Is anything here, surprising or interesting to anyone? How many people are familiar with modulo before this slide? Okay. Could somebody explain modulo for the rest of the tutorial attendance? Anyone? Bueller? All right, go ahead.
Typing this in IPython versus regular Python, what difference does it make? Typing this in IPython rather than I just, typing Python.
In this case, no difference.
What difference does it make, though?
What difference does it make?
I'm just asking the class rhetorically, why would we want to use an interactive console versus just a standard built-in console? Exactly. So it's going to give you more opportunity to interact with what it is you're working on. To do straight math, of course, it's fine. But as you get into more advanced Python syntax, it's helpful to have something that has a little bit more oomph, so to speak. So I just would recommend it. You don't have to use IPython. I just think that it's helpful, especially when you're first learning.
Yeah, it's pretty nifty. Okay, so, and again, I gave you guys the link to the slides, so if there's anything on here that you want to practice more or explore more, this will be on Google Docs forever, as long as Google is a thing. Let's see here. So strings. Strings in Python, pretty similar to strings in other languages you've probably worked with. So here I define a string called, a variable called my name, and I set it equal to a string called Sandy Strong, which is my actual name, and then I print my name. And it comes out into the interpreter, very nice, right? And again, as Katharine was saying, and you guys realize as well, if I had done something wrong here, I would be getting some feedback right now. Whereas if I was in the interpreter, in the standard interpreter, I'd still be getting information, but it might not be as useful to me. So now go ahead and let's actually do this, because this is, I don't know if we I forget if we demoed this earlier. My name, this is probably not a good idea. Yeah.
Can you type it?
Yeah. Why don't you do it? It's gonna take years of my life to do.
This is identity theft.
I was just wondering, what's so bad about holding a microphone? And then I realized what was so bad about it. So what's going on? So that's pretty nifty. So those are all the methods that you can use on a string object. And there's another way to get that information, but tab complete is always a pretty cool thing, right?
And this does not happen in the Python interpreter. This only happens in IPython, that you can do something like, and I can even do something like, let me see all the T ones. Okay, translate, what does that do?
Yeah, so it behaves very much the same way as your Unix command line tab completion stuff here.
I don't know how you're...
And you can even search, right? There you're searching for previous...
I'm trying to see if I can translate. I don't know how to use translate. Is there an obvious way to tell if it's an attribute or a function? You can do... question mark. So question mark will tell you function or method, what it wants, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, again, why IPython is just so nice when you're first learning.
Yeah, I think it does not like up arrow key. Sorry. Let me
I have no idea how to use that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a Linux person, so sometimes I do things that are mean to other operating systems.
So just so we can have both in case we want them.
Yeah.
But I actually wanted to...
What did you want me to do?
Yeah, I'm not good, Max. not it either. Nope. Oh, I know what it's doing. Yeah. Sorry, guys. So we just won't use the up arrow key anymore because that messes up the terminal and then it's not readable. I don't really use this for much other than Netflix, so I'm a really bad Mac user. Okay, so we saw how interesting this can be, how useful it can be. It beats having to exit or move away from your terminal and go to the Python docs on the website, or, I mean, you can always do this instead. If you're in the standard interpreter, you can always just do, dir. Go ahead and define a variable and let's do dir on it and let's see what we get. Your my name equals the same example, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No
See,
tab complete.
So no niceness in the standard one, right? So that's not as pretty, is it? That's hard to read. And you can even import pretty print and make it come out all pretty, but why would, it's more work. So, so some useful string methods. We saw a lot of the string methods in IPython. These are some of the ones that I have used a lot in my coding in Python. So strips leading and trailing white space. So if I wanted to, say, define a variable that, let me just try something. Yeah, 'cause I don't mind just doing, can you guys hear me and everything? This is fine? All right, I'll just do this. So what if I wanted to say my name, this is unfortunate. This is, yeah.
Here.
Yeah, we're gonna swap for this because I'm gonna be doing most of the talking during this part. It's probably better that way. Like this.
Yeah.
It's not. Sorry, guys.
Perfect.
Okay, this should be easier now. So if I wanted to do something like this, and I'm gonna go ahead and close this out of here because we're not really gonna be messing with the standard interpreter today. All my examples are in IPython because it's cooler. So let's see, my name is, so notice I put space Sandy Strong, and I'm gonna put a bunch of spaces. So print my name, or just my name, sorry, yeah. So you notice how these quotes show up here and all the space, right, the big gap? Well, I can do my name.strip, and it stripped those white spaces off. So this is useful, for dealing with things that are user input maybe, or
Especially when you're doing like large data parsing or something like that. Like let's say somebody's like, oh, can you make this CSV file into a database, which is a common request.
Yeah.
Then you can make the data clean before you even enter it into the database.
What if I did my name equal, you know what, name Sandy, right? So I have an upper function which makes all the characters uppercase. So name.upper, it's pretty convenient. I mean, it's kind of fun to play with. I'm sure there's some cases where
Nice for things like states and country abbreviations should be uppercase. Other types of things where you're doing large data cleaning.
Yeah. Are you guys all able to get this to work in IPython on your laptops? Things going according to plan? Awesome.
What's your question?
Yeah, can you count on your name, my name dot count?
Why don't you try it out?
I tried, I'm getting an error, that's why.
Let's see.
Try len.
No, this count exists.
Not on a, oh yes it does, I apologize. Takes at least one argument. One. Direct a character buffer object.
Count of A, maybe.
Oh,
Use
yeah.
the index.
So it's counting how many occurrences of that letter occur in the string. So if I said name equals AAAB, then I did.
Again, if you do name.count question mark, it will tell you the doc strings.
3 A's. Yeah, probably so. Yeah, I counted. Wow. Count is not something I don't think I've ever really used that. It's interesting though. I mean, it could be useful, definitely. I mean, all these things are useful. So yeah, it tells us that we need to, it'll return the number.
So substring indexing.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. So lower works similarly to upper, as you can imagine.
There's also title in case you need to do title casing. Sorry, question? Close out of that IPython console and then open it again, and this time don't run %pdb.
Yeah.
You could also type %pdb to turn off.
Oh, perfect. Yes.
Okay, so you can type %pdb and then %pdb again to disable.
Disable. Enable, disable.
Good to know. So, another useful one is split. It's by default, split is white space delimited. So if I said var equals my words here, and I said var.split, it will give me a list of 3 elements, right? This is a Python list with the square brackets on the end. And as you can see, it is delimited by the white space. If I were to say var.split,
Comma. On a show. No.
like let's put D, right? It'll split on a D. So you get my WR and an S here, removing the D, right? Because it actually parses the string. It does the actual split operation on the character that I passed into the method. So I use this mostly. I wind up using this for white space or like a comma. Again, comma separated variables and comma separated CSV files where the data is uniform and I know I can maybe trust that consistently. Or if I wanted to split on new line, if I were parsing a CSV file, I would probably split on new line first, and then for each of those lines, I'd loop, which we'll talk about loops in a little bit. I would loop through that, and then I would split on comma.
Well, and it's a really easy function to use when you're using something that has a delimited pattern, like let's say a request.path. So you know that the forward slashes are going to be delimiting different parts of your path variables, or let's say query string parameters where you know that certain things are going to be easily demarcated in a similar pattern. So sometimes it's used in those cases. Yes. Can you split on 2 different things? You could run split twice. So you could have var split D split
Well, that returns a
W.
list.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Or you can do, if you want to do 2 letters in a row, but no, essentially it
Yeah,
doesn't
that's
work in that type of way.
Yeah, because the act of calling split itself returns a list. So you
And then
can't
you
call
could-
that split on a list, right? Because a list isn't a string, and as we'll find out soon here, lists don't have the same methods as string objects have. So, and yes, you can like slice lists up, but it's a different code, so you'd have to do it differently. So another cool one is find, and this is again sort of just searching the string for something. So if this is var, then I want to say var.find words. Find words. So now if we look at this, it returns 3. If we look at the string itself, W is WORDS, the beginning of the string words, is at position 3 in the string. M is at position 0, Y is at position 1, space is position 2, and W is position 3. So find looks at that and says, well, there you go, it's at 3. That's the location of that string. What if I went and did something, and there I go using the up arrow key and ruining my session again, var.find dog, right? -1 means it didn't find anything. So this function is always going to return the positive integer position for that indicates the index of the occurrence of the string that you're finding, or it is going to return -1, indicating that that string was not found anywhere. That substring was not found anywhere within the string. So strings are iterable, right? You know, we could do even var, right? So.
And we'll get into lists in a minute, but.
Yeah, and there's so many cool things you can do in Python, and given limitations, there's a lot of things I can't show you. I tried to pick the things that I thought were really useful things, more or less, but yeah, there's a lot of really nifty stuff. So let's do starts with really quick, because that can be also useful. So var dot starts with, well, if I can type, my, right? So, ooh, what did I do? Oh, there's no underscore. Sorry. Yeah, starts with this no underscore. So that's another thing that IPython can help me with, is actually I can check and see, is that actually the name of the method I'm invoking? So var dot starts with, see? Pretty nifty. My, true. So it returns true because var starts with my. We could even say var dot starts with my, sorry. Var dot starts with my, right? Because technically, that is a continuous string from index position 0, which is where im is, my space w, the string starts with that, right? That is the beginning of the string. Also, var dot starts with im, also returns true. But if we look at the string again and say, what if we want to do var dot starts with words? That's false, because it starts with the letter m. We could even do var dot starts with my words here. Actually, I haven't done this. It should return true, though. Yeah. It's the entire string, but it still starts with that. Python's just looking to see if what we're passing into starts with is in line with what that number of characters in the string, that they match, basically, to that point. And they do.
Essentially, as you can see, Python has a lot of different helper functions that perform kind of some of the same operations, right? We've seen several that are basically substring parsers. We've seen several that are mere syntax changers. But this is, again, another reason why I personally love Python, is it gives me a lot of tools to do similar functionality, and then I can choose the one that best fits what I'm exactly trying to do with my code that day.
Yeah, and there's a lot of real world applications for these functions, as you guys can imagine, and they're so accessible and so easy. You know, I accomplish this in one very short line of code. I can do these powerful operations. Okay, so string formatting. This is something that you'd run into a lot in web applications, and I'm not sure if we see it in the project or not. I don't recall. But string formatting. But I felt like it was worth mentioning because it comes up when you're trying to format text output and pass in a variable, right? So I define two variables in this example, my age 28, my name Sandy. So saying print, hello, my name is %s, right? So %s indicates that I'm going to be inserting a string into, in place of, right? I'm using a variable, I'm inserting the value of a variable in place of that %s, right? And it's going to be expecting a string. There are other types of string formatting. There's like %d, %r, %f, for like float, decimal, raw, things like that. But we won't get into those today. So as you can see here, the very first sentence that I tested is I actually substitute only my name in there, right? So my name is %s, and then I have a % here, and then I follow it with the variable name that I defined on the line above. And it says, hello, my name is Sandy. Well, what if I want to print multiple, what if I want to insert multiple variables into my string with string formatting? I want to tell you my name and my age. So I can actually rewrite that sentence with %s. Hello, my name is %s, and I'm %s years old. The only difference between the way this is written in code and with multiple variables versus one is that it's actually, you got parentheses, right? So you're passing in, multiple things at the same time, and in order to tell Python, please include all of these, you're wrapping them in parentheses. And this % operator indicates that, yes, we're about to do some string formatting. So, and the result of that code is that it prints out the full sentence with both the variables that I defined injected into the string, where before we had %s. So, these are, and you can inject as many, you could have a string with like 5,000, positions to format. It's really up to you. I'm don't know why anyone would do that, but there might be a use case for it. So yeah, in general, string formatting like this type of thing is very useful. I think if you're on a website or something, or if you're running probably not a website, that's template rendering, which we'll talk about later, but maybe you're running a command line application, you want it to print out some path for you. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, but age is not a string, how come you inserted age as a string in?
I'm sorry?
Age is not a string.
Age has a string representation, but
Correct.
it's not a string.
So when I format it into the string as a string, it's going to be represented as a string. I could use %d, right?
For a digit.
For digits, yeah.
So essentially, string formatting is used, when you want to have a string placeholder, whether it's just a placeholder and you're going to be passing it variables later, or essentially you're using it, let's say, as a placeholder with some of the SQL libraries use this type of syntax to properly inject variables into SQL.
Column names and things like that.
So this is essentially used a lot when you know that you're going to have some variables you're going to be setting. You know that you'd like them in a string at some point in time. And first you're going to create a placeholder string that, is awaiting these variables. And this type of string formatting will very easily tell you if, say, you passed an incorrect number of variables. Right, it's going to throw an error. You didn't pass any variables, it's going to throw an error. You told it to anticipate a digit and you instead passed it a string.
Right.
These are the types of things that, Python, unlike maybe some other languages, will very much alert you of your mistake and throw an exception in those cases. Yeah. And so it's a really nice way, the string formatting is a really nice way of allowing you to have these strings that have these placeholders that you wish to pass data to at a later point in time. And also to allow you to let error reporting happen if for some reason, let's say the user input or the script input is incorrect, it will very much error out if you tell it to, let's say, expect a digit and pass it a string.
Yeah, and this particular example is obviously it's extremely simple just to kind of convey the concept. This is not useful in the real world. It's just sort of there to show you guys string formatting is a thing and this is the syntax to use it. So let's talk a little bit about lists, which we saw before. Some of the string functions that we used, some of the methods that we used to operate on strings, returned lists. So list in Python is a square bracket on one end, series of objects inside, separated by commas, and then closed off by another square bracket. So as you can see here, I've got a couple of elements in here. This list has 3 elements. We have a string, bacon, a float, pie, and another list. And that list contains bread and milk, which are both strings. You can store pretty much anything you want inside of lists. You have lists of lists, lists of lists of lists. At that point, you might want to reevaluate your data model.
Why you're doing that?
It depends. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with lists. So let's go ahead and type just really quickly to kind of get the feel of it. So stuff equals 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, and then let's put a list in here just because it's fun. A, 4. This is total nonsense, but I just wanted to kind of show, like, sometimes a lot of times people I've taught, it takes a minute to get the hang of remembering to put the commas in, remembering to close the open and close bracket, sorry. So let's talk a little bit about list methods. So these are 3 kind of useful list methods that I wanted to highlight. So insert, you provide an index position and item to be inserted into the list. So like with most things in computer science, it's 0 index. In my example here, my stuff list, 1 is at position 0. So if I wanted to insert, say I wanted to say stuff dot insert, let's see here. So index positions, I want to actually insert it at position 0. So I'm going to actually bump 1 to position 1. I'm going to say dog, because I have a dog and dogs are nice. And see, there's a, So now if I do stuff, dog is now in index position 0. 1 has been bumped down to 1. So with the insert method, I can actually manipulate the positions of the other objects in the list by adding new elements in a very targeted way, right? Another cool function is append. This will add something to the end of the list. So if you just want to build out, like maybe you have a loop of some sort and you want to build out a lot of, make it really long, you don't care about the order, it doesn't matter, you just want to fill it up with stuff. You can add things, right? So
Or maybe you do care about the order, but it's in the proper order already, and you're just parsing through something and adding things when they follow the correct variable pattern that you'd like.
So I appended cat to stuff. So now if I print stuff, dog and cat are on opposite ends of the list, which is probably a good thing. And nothing special there, but it made my list grow in one extra element. This is very common. Dot append is very commonly used. I don't use insert so much. I think it's kind of neat because you can put things where you want them to be, but append is extremely commonly used in.
And I'm sure, if you've programmed in other languages that you've used append before.
Yeah. Pop is saying, okay, so I want to pop something out of the list, right? So the cool thing about this is it actually returns, so if I say, okay, stuff dot pop, let's see, provide the index position to pop an item out, right? So pop, like, let's see, what do we want to do? Like 0 is dog, 1 is 1. So let's just do 0 because I made a poor choice and put integers in. All right, so if I did that, it pops dog out of the list, but it actually returns dog. So what if I wanted to remove it from the list, but I actually wanted to assign it to another variable? If I print stuff out now, dog is no longer there. What if I wanted to put cat into another variable called pet, right? So I could do len stuff, wait, not lent, len, sorry. So stuff is 8 elements long, right? So I have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 would be my, oops, sorry guys, get this eventually. So if I said stuff dot pop, sorry, my pet equals stuff dot pop 7, right? That's going to pop the 7th element in my list out of the list and into the my pet variable, right? Because I just assigned the result of pop, which returned cat. So if I print stuff, cat is gone. If I print my pet, it's cat. So it literally will just take that element, pop it out of the list, and if you don't assign it to variable, it's just gone, just.
And this, some of this stuff seems like why would we be doing these things? But pop in particular, or any time where you're using, let's say negative index or reverse indexing of a list. Let's say you're returning a bunch of values from a database. You know that you've already ordered or sorted them in a way with your SQL or with your NoSQL, whatever it is you're using, that you want the last value or the first value. These are really easy ways to get access to whatever data point that you're looking for while still retaining the entire query return that you ran from your database. It's a really nice way of saying, like, okay, where are all my blog entries? Okay, I want to set the latest one over here, and then I want all the rest to be still in this list of things. So it's a really nice way when you're particularly a web developer and you're interacting with databases to use these list functionalities to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah, a lot of really easy little things that you can do to do substantial manipulation of. Are there,
just before we move into tuples, or tuples, depending on who you ask.
I like tuples.
Are there any questions about lists, strings, integers? Sorry.
Is there a way to pop a range?
No.
But there is range index methods.
Let's take a look.
You're not.
Stuff that.
So they're just if you. It's not going to remove it from, but if you use slices,
Yeah, you can slice your list.
so that can return, 3 till the end, 3 to, sorry, I did up again.
Yeah, that's fine.
But you could do 3 to 5, you could do 1 to 3. Again, it's not removing it from the initial array, but it does give you the slices.
Yeah, and then you
if
can
that's
do
what you're
negative
aiming for.
indexes. You can reference negative indexes as well to say, give me all but the last one. -1, give me all but the last one, right? Because here we have C and we have A4, and when we use -1, A4 is not there because we are printing all but the last element in the list. So
Yes.
there's a lot of cool stuff. Sorry.
So I noticed that, some of the methods, that you can do with stuff, they start with like double underscore dot add, double underscore something.
Yes.
So what are this? Because you called one function length and you put stuff inside the length. You could do stuff dot length as well.
Yeah.
What's
These are-
the difference?
I mean, so these are magic methods in Python. We call them magic methods. Generally, you don't use them. I mean, they are used obviously, but in terms of your high-level application code, you don't. It's very much discouraged that you use them.
It's essentially like other languages that have private methods.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same concept where these are kind of, global class methods, and we utilize them usually in other ways, like in the direct call. But they are there. You can obviously look through them. If you do a question mark, it's going to tell you a little bit of what that is. Again, most of the time, we utilize them the way Sandy is doing so in
second
line
one.
53.
Yeah,
where
see.
we're calling them in a direct, coherent way rather than a kind of a more convoluted way. In
Yeah.
Python, it is very much appreciated from other Python developers and also from you yourself when you're later looking at code, for you to be explicit in the way that you utilize the language and its many amazing magic methods. So
Yeah.
we usually refrain from using the magic methods from direct call. We rather use them explicitly in
Yeah.
line 53 versus 52.
And we do talk about later the sort of the way Python handles public, the way that we deal with private things in Python. Yes, we can still access them, but certain naming conventions indicate that the programmer wants us to respect that those should be treated as private objects. So if we looked at the actual Python, if we looked at the actual repr, what I used right there, the actual repr function, somewhere in there it's going to call the magic method, right? But we aren't exposing that. It's not the interface it's giving us is just the straight repr function, which is part of the standard library. And there's a lot of reasons. Pretty much if you work on a team with other Python developers, at least one of them will probably slap your wrist at some point if they catch you using magic methods superfluously. If you're writing lower level code, there are certainly cases where it's warranted, and
Or if you're writing your own classes or something like that and you need to create your own
course.
magic methods, right? But then
yeah,
you're...
like built-in magic methods, not so much.
Yes.
Okay, were there any other questions on, yes?
You have two lists there. Is there a way to sort one list versus not sorting?
You mean the nested list?
Yes.
I could access that element, which I know is at position, I just did it again. Stuff 7, right? Oh wait, right? So the 6th element in the list is a list itself, so you want to sort.
I want to sort the main list, not the sub list. Is there a way to do that?
Yeah, it won't sort the sublist if you sort the main list. It will sort the sublist within the main list, but it will
Right.
not sort the sublist.
Right.
It's not a recursive sort.
Exactly. Sorry.
About these magic methods again, so the correct way to call it, or the preferred way is which?
Oh, for length. So len stuff.
And how is Python resolving that if there's other things in my namespace that provide another thing?
It would overwrite the, well, let's try it, actually. Yeah, so it actually will, it just is like, okay, len is now this function that accepts no arguments.
Which is also why you should respect.
Well, I mean, this is standard, yeah, and this is,
yeah.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, Python's really flexible. There's a lot of things you can a lot of ways in which you can abuse things, I guess, as with any language, I suppose, but,
Fallback. I guess my question is, does it fall back to looking at the type of stuff before it decides whether it should call len on stuff or any of other 3 or 4 other different implementations?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I see. So len can be done, len is a function that can be applied to iterables, right? So,
No,
Is that-
it doesn't, as you can see, it does not do that, right? So you could, in this case, then call stuff dot underscore underscore len underscore underscore, right? To return that same, to call that same global function. You have to put a parens at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is also why, it's preferable to use syntax highlighting and other things like that so that you understand when you're overriding global Python commands or other things like that, you should try to avoid, obviously, as with any language, overriding int and things like that with variable names. So,
Yeah.
it's just kind of good practices. It again goes with kind of the Python ethos of being very explicit with your code and being very clear to not only yourself but other developers looking at your code of what you're trying to accomplish. And likely what you're trying to accomplish is not overwrite the len, functionality.
These are globals on every variable.
Yes.
Right. So it's just sort of available for you to use, so. All right, are there any other questions about
Other
lists?
questions before we move on to tuples?
Yes.
Quick question, using the built-in method sort versus sorted from the global namespace, why use list.sort versus just straight up sorted passing?
I know that there's a distinction. Can you do a question mark?
Sure.
A lot of things I've read said.
Sorry, what do you mean?
Get rid of dot sort.
Yeah, I've
Practice and use sorted.
Yeah.
Because it's compatible with everything.
Yeah, I've pretty much only ever used sorted, but I know that there is a distinction. Do sort question mark?
I think one will change the big one and the
Yeah, I think it depends on the return type. Can you sorted it and versus sort it and see what happens? Sorted goes in front.
Oh, sorry. Like this?
Stuff. And then, so that's returns. And then can you do stuff?
sorry.
Well, we should have done stuff in between.
I'm not too familiar. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. Bleh. Okay, yeah, so stuff.sort returns none, it does affect the list object, yeah. So if we were to, sorry, I was like.
So it's a matter of whether it's actually, you're determining whether that sorted list gets set to a different variable or whether you want to sort that list in place.
So if I pin something, maybe it'll make a little more sense if I do stuff.sort stuff. Yeah, so,
Sort modifies the list and sorted actually returns.
Yes.
yeah, and I kind of did that backwards. I should have done sorted first and then done sort to illustrate that. Does that make sense to you guys, what he was saying? So sorted is actually a copy of the list. It does not actually modify the original object. It shows you a sorted representation of it, but it doesn't modify the object that you defined initially, as it was initially existing. Whereas dot sort on a list object manipulates the object.
And returns none. So
Yeah.
you cannot, if you want to get a sorted list and send it somewhere, like to return it to something else or to set it to another variable, you'd want to use sorted, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you just cared about sorting a list and, moving along in your code with that list as a sorted object, then you would use dot sort.
It's just like how append adds something to a list, right? Yeah, it manipulates the list object. Okay, so let's move on to tuples really quick. So tuples they look a lot like lists, right? They're, instead of square brackets, they have parens. So I did a simple tuple here where I put 3 elements inside of it and they're all strings, and then I printed them. Pretty simple, right? So the special thing about tuples is that they are immutable, and that just means that once they've been created, they can't be changed. Because they're immutable, they're also hashable. And that's valuable because when something's hashable, it means you will always be able to run a hashing algorithm on that object And because the object is immutable, we are confident that that value will never change. So that tuple can exist forever and in memory, and every time you run the hashing algorithm on it, it's always going to result in the same value because it's not changeable. Dictionary keys are also immutable, and that makes sense, right? Because you kind of need to know, I mean, how would you be able to use a dictionary if there was a chance that the dictionary key could have changed? And I don't know if you guys have, we're going to talk about dictionaries soon, but basically you need to be confident that the value you're expecting to be there is there. And immutable objects, it's guaranteed. So useful tuple methods, obviously you can't manipulate them like you can, you know, a list, strings, things like that. So
It's going to be slightly less functionality
index,
since
right? So
you can't modify them in as easily. You can only create new ones.
right, so I made a tuple, right, called tup, and tup.index. Well, what's it index to? Let's put position 2. Oh, wait. What did I do? Hang on. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got this. This one always trips me up. So what index? So this is going to give you the index of the item that you are requesting. So it basically looks at the tuple and says, what is the index position of B? And it is 1. A is at 0, B is at 1, C is at 2, right? It's pretty simple. I mean, I've never used this. I just happened to look at it and think might as well say something about it. So tuples, yeah. Useful when you don't want things to change. Otherwise, useless, I guess.
Yeah, in Python, a lot of time tuples you'll use when you're passing, you know, global variables around to different modules, and
Yeah.
you want to make sure that they don't get changed wherever they are.
Like URL routing in a web framework like Django, a lot of tuples there. You need to know
Settings objects,
Yeah.
config options, like a lot of things
Absolutely.
like that. A lot of times we'll use tuples so that we can ensure that they aren't modified by chunks of the code.
Exactly.
Again, if you absolutely need to modify a tuple, most likely what you're going to do is you're going to create a new tuple with some sort of indexing of the previous tuple. So you're essentially building on a tuple by creating a new tuple. So.
Yeah. So the next and the last data type we're going to talk about right now is dictionaries. And dictionaries are really broadly used. It's really, one really cool thing about Python is that they mimic the structure of a JSON object. Makes it really, really easy when you're building a web application to
Use
handle
Ajax.
data coming from, yeah, exactly. To use it, use your JSON library and you just load it into a Python, you know, just decode it right into a Python dictionary. Really easy to do. So dictionaries have two components, keys and values. They are ordered by a curly brace, right? So curly brace, and then key value pair, key value pair, key value pair. Each key value pair is separated by a comma, and each key and value is separated by a colon. So John, colon, football. Football is John's favorite sport. Pretty straightforward. You can have as many keys and values as you want in a dictionary, and as I was saying before I talked about the dictionaries, was that the keys are immutable. And again, you need to be able to know that that key is not going to change, because that is your way to reference the value in the dictionary object. If that key were to change, you would not be able to, you wouldn't necessarily be able to get to that again, right? You'd have very little confidence in the usefulness of a lot of the functions of these types of objects, which require that you, or allow you to reference a key to retrieve a value.
And later when we're looking at the application, we're going to get definitely into a lot of the dictionaries. But dictionaries, our example here with the sports is an example using strings. But you can have dictionaries where the keys are strings and then the values are lists, right? The values can be other dictionaries. The values can be integers. So
Yeah.
again, they are definitely widely used, obviously in numerous languages, but they're a really useful data type. And if you have a long career in Python, you will become very friendly with dictionaries.
Did that again. So a couple useful methods in dictionaries. First one, get. So this retrieves the value of the given key or returns none if the key doesn't exist in the dictionary. So we know, since our keys are immutable, we know that if we reference a key and it returns none, that key really was never there. It's not that it changed its name on us. So sports.get John returns football. So John is the key, football is the value. And get allows us to retrieve the value.
And we utilize that rather than, I'm sure you've seen examples where people
none.
are using sports and then open square bracket, John, close square bracket. Can you give that example?
Right.
Yeah. So you'll see this a lot in code. The reason why I prefer to use get is try sports open bracket Sandy.
You're going to get a key error because the key is not in the dictionary. And if you're writing your application code like this, can you imagine how much error checking you would need to do to prevent these errors potentially getting raised all the time? You know, if I'm a user and I'm logging in with a fake name and that's not in the database, and then it loads up into my application and it's like, sorry, key isn't there. Well, that's because it doesn't exist. But using get is a graceful way of handling the missing key. Because if we do sports.get Sandy, it returns none, right? And none I talk about a little bit later, but I'll go ahead and tell you guys now, none is essentially Python's equivalent to null. So a lot of things we say null is equal to null. None is the absence of a value, so in Python, none is used to indicate the absence of a value. In this case, there is no value for the key Sandy because I'm not in the dictionary. Sports includes John and Sue. Those are the two keys that I could request from that dictionary and expect to receive a value back. So what if I wanted to get all the values in the dictionary? I can actually do that. Sports.values. Just return the values in a list. That can be really useful, and it's very useful in web applications and probably a lot of applications where you just need to get at the values. You don't really care where the keys are. You can do the same thing with keys, right? You can say sports.keys, and it'll give you just the keys. And since the keys are immutable, there's probably some other implications there. It's kind of interesting, like values can change any time. Like I can say, and I don't really go into too much dictionary stuff because of limitations on time, but I can say sports Sue equals basketball, right? And then sports, suddenly Sue's favorite sport is basketball. But I can't change Sue's name because that's a key and it's immutable. So there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with dictionaries and useful stuff. So items, I thought this was kind of interesting.
And we will be using it later.
Yes, we will. That's why I put it in here. That we need. Sports.items. This returns a list of tuples, right? Each tuple contains two elements. Element 0 is the key. Element 1 is the value. So Sue and basketball, the first key value pair, and John and football is the second key value pair. So since tuples are immutable, right, we have now taken the information that was stored in our dictionary, which has values that are mutable, and we've taken it out of that situation. We said, okay, we're freezing this, right, because we're getting these values into tuples where we know they can't change anymore. And I'm sure you guys can imagine the implications of that and the usefulness that could provide, which we'll see in the app that we're building in a bit. So update, add a new key value pair to the dictionary. Again, you could do something like this. Update, is it like syntax is, whoa, I'm stupid, sorry. Sports.update, Joe, and he likes baseball, right? Sports. Now Joe is in the dictionary and he likes baseball. There's other ways to add key value pairs to a dictionary. This is just one of them. Do you have any questions on dictionaries? Yes?
Can keys have value other than string? Can they be?
Can there be a value other than a string in a dictionary? For key, absolutely. You can store, let's see, let's actually use our update because we just did that.
Hashable objects.
Sorry?
Hashable objects.
Hashable objects, exactly. So we could say, we could put a tuple in there. We could be like, let's see what they're doing. We say 1, 2, 3, right? So my new key is that, which is tuple. And the value could be list, A, B, C. So a lot of like crossing the T's and dotting the I's there, but now we have a really interesting key value pair, right? So we have a key, which is a tuple that contains 1, 2, 3, and tuples are immutable, so it's a valid key, right? And the value is a list. Any other questions about, yes? Let's see, what is the best, let's see, what's the best we do? I'm thinking del, let's see, sports dot, let's see, what did I use here? Oh, they have a pop method. So we could do pop, and that would behave the same way that the list pop method is working. So if I said 1, 2, 3, and I apologize for that, it's ugly, but I popped that out of the dictionary, so my tuple key is gone now. That's one way to remove something. You can also do del, like if I said sports, so del sports Joe, right?
Del is delete, as I'm
Delete.
sure you've
So
guessed.
actually delete that from the dictionary. It's gone out of memory. So
Is del global, does that work on other objects?
yes, I could do test equals me, del, print test, del test, print test, nothing, right? It's gone. So
There's also a dot delete method that works on a lot of Python objects.
yeah. Yeah. A lot of times too, like, I mean, most of my Python programming experience has been web application stuff, and the cycle of everything is so quick that things don't stick around long anyway. You know, I have seen definitely cases where things need to be deleted and cleaned up manually, but usually
Python's pretty good about cleaning up.
yeah, it takes care of itself most times. But it's good to be aware that these are things you can do, and in certain cases they are necessary. Okay, any other questions about dictionaries so far?
Do the keys have to be unique?
The keys have to be able to be hashed. They have to be hashable objects.
Yeah, so strings, tuples, hashable objects.
Because
Both
essentially,
immutable. Strings are
a
immutable as well.
yeah, essentially a dictionary is Python's hash table, right? So they have to be able to be hashed, right?
Okay, any other questions about dictionaries? Yes?
Yeah, essentially, I guess you would use pop if you wanted to remove the item from the dictionary while also getting the value, right?
Right.
That would be the useful way to do that. Because if not, then you'd have to call the value first and then delete the key.
Yeah.
Right?
Extra line of code.
So you'd only want to use it if you wanted to pull a key from the dictionary, remove it, but also return its value. So. Sorry? No.
Correct. You would never call pop without an argument for dictionary. If you,
I don't even know.
it's going to give you an error because it expects one argument. So if we were to go into Python code, and was that your question? Yeah. So if we were to actually go look at the Python code that in the dictionary code that handles pop, we would see that it requires an argument, right? And so we get this nice pretty error in IPython that tells us, hey, sorry, I needed an argument and I didn't get one.
Yeah.
And it'll kind of yell at you and then you learn and all that good stuff. Any other dictionary questions?
Or tuple questions.
Or
I know
tuple
we
questions.
covered tuples.
Okay, all right, let's see here. Let me, oops, internet does not like me very much right now. Okay, so I talked about what none was. Does anyone have questions about none? I mean, I've been talking about it much, but none represents the absence of a value. It's frequently used to represent the absence of a value, and you'll see that later when we talk about Python functions. A lot of times default arguments that functions receive or functions are defined with are assigned to be null initially because it's the absence of a value, and we just want there to be something there so that we don't throw weird errors, but we don't want a value because we don't want weird things to happen because the function that we're passing something into might increment or decrement, and can't operate on none. So.
And as you
in that
start
way.
writing your own functions, a lot of times you'll return none or something if you want the parent function or the parent variable that's calling that function to know that, okay, you couldn't find the value, it wasn't in the database, or it didn't return anything, or it didn't occur as expected, then later on in your code, you can test for the presence of that variable and move on depending on whether or not that initial function returned none or returned a value.
Yeah. Let's see here. What we got next? So incrementing and decrementing values. In Python, you increment with the plus equals and you decrement with the minus equals. There's no plus plus or minus minus. So I said like counter equals 0. And then counter, obviously it's 0. Counter plus equals 1. Counter is now 1.
Counter plus equals 3.
Counter plus equals 3. Counter is now 4. So if I did counter plus plus, invalid syntax, right? Does not work in Python. Counter minus equals 10. Counter is now -6. So just so you guys know, we're going to see this in the app. I just want to let you guys know that that's how that works in Python. Pretty simple. Does anyone have any questions about that, or any going on? All right, cool. So let's talk about loops, because we're going to see that in our application. So loops, code blocks, and Boolean logic. For loops and while loops are the two loops that I chose to really, kind of frequent stuff. We're going to be working with those in the app that we're building. But before we can really talk about loops, I need to talk about white space for a minute. Has anyone ever gotten an indentation error in Python when you were playing with it? Yeah. So Python is white space aware, and that means that, simply put, it just means that within a code block, Python expects a consistent and uniform amount of indentation. And the PEP8 standard, PEP8 is sort of a collection of Python standards that everyone in the Python community kind of agrees are cool standards and we should abide by them. PEP8 says 4 spaces indentation inside of a code block. So what's a code block, right? Let's find out what that is, because we haven't seen that yet. So simple kind of code block right here would be just, we have a for loop. We have items. First I'm defining items, right? Items, socks, shoes, shirt, pants, somebody's clothes. And then I want to loop through the items in that list, right? So the for loop operates on an iterable, right? You could operate on a string, you could operate on a list. In this case, we're using a list here. And notice how the print x is indented. It's 4 spaces, I promise. Indented 4 spaces from the parent, right? So this is a small block of code. Once I am done with my for loop, right? So the best way for you to see this, and actually IPython does this for you, kind of spoils you. If you're coding in like a flat file, like VI or whatever your editor of choice is, you have to do your indentations yourself. You have to set up your config file to say, hey, please set my tab to 4 spaces because it doesn't like tabs. But IPython treats us really well, obviously. So if I said items equals A, B, C, just to keep it shorter, right? For x in items, right? My IPython isn't doing that for some reason. I don't know why. But print x. So it is printing each item in the list, right? It's iterating across the list. So the for loop goes through first time, it says, okay, first item in the list is A, second is B, third is C. And it's a very simple loop because all we're doing is printing something. What if we want to do something a little more complicated, right? So for x in items, print hello, not this is really complicated, but let's pretend it is. And then let's say print x. That's an indentation error. Why did that happen? See, within the for loop, Python says until you end me, right, until this code block is done, I expect consistent indentation. And I didn't do that. These little dots here, which you're going to see when you start working with more complicated things in PDB, these things sort of indicate like I'm waiting for you to finish. Remember how up here when I did this, I had to hit enter again, right, before I actually executed my for loop. So Python is waiting. It's like, okay, do you have anything else for this code block? I'm waiting for you. And because I didn't hit enter twice, Python was like, wait a minute, that print x you just didn't indent properly, that was part of the code block that the for is in. You can't do that, it doesn't work. If I were to do this instead, for x in items, print hello, print x, and notice how it's waiting, right? It hasn't executed yet. It's saying, do I want to enter anything else in this code block? No, I don't. So it executes and it works. Does it have to be 4 spaces? No, but kind of, it's good. Everybody likes, I like 4 spaces.
Follow good standards.
It's a good standard, yeah. Yeah, it's a very good standard. It's readable and it looks nice on the screen. So does anyone have any, well, before I say that, so we talked about what happens if you don't indent. I highly recommend reading this article. It talks about sort of white space awareness, and it actually takes it on like back to C and the way tabs behave. And I read it a couple times, and I think I still don't quite understand all of it, but it's enlightening. Because a lot of times I talk to people who are like, oh, I don't like Python because you have to indent in the white space, and I'm like, well, there's reasons for things, and it's a sane format. So
One comment that I often hear from people that are learning Python from other languages are, I really like how easy it is to read, and whitespace helps enforce some of that. So there are good reasons.
Exactly. So now that we've kind of learned that little lesson about code blocks, which I learn on a semi-regular basis, so you know, I'll be coding and then, oh, indentation error. Luckily, those are really easy to fix, right? So we need a little bit of Boolean logic for this tutorial. It's not anything that you guys probably haven't seen before. Basically, true is true, false is false, false is not true, not false is true, and not true is false. I highly recommend checking out Zed Shaw's Boolean practice chapter from Learn Python the Hard Way, and I linked to it in the slides. It's actually it really works out your Boolean logic, really kind of makes you break down the problem and really, I guess, figure out within a couple steps what the solution is. But that's not something we need to get into today. Oh, does anyone have questions about this basic Boolean logic or any sort of this doing? Yeah, cool. So while loops. While loops are the other type of loop that we're going to see. I believe we see this in the tutorial. Do you see this in the tutorial? I should decide to throw it in for fun, maybe. So while loops execute until the condition which they are defined with is no longer true. So while x is true, do y. In this case, I initialize a variable named counter to 3. And I say while counter is greater than or equal to 0, print counter, decrement counter. Right? So the while loop will continue to execute until the condition counter greater than or equal to 0 is no longer valued into true. So standard while loop stuff, right? Infinite loops, right? While loops, I feel like for loops are not as prone just because they're not prone to it because they operate on iterables, which are by nature finite. So, you know, but while loops, on the other hand, a small logic error, like if I just forgot to put that decrement line in there, I'd be in an infinite loop, right? So just something to keep in mind. The good thing about infinite loops, though, is that they're, you know, pretty quick to reveal themselves as infinite loops a lot of times. Yeah, so I think we are at the halfway point right now, I believe.
So we're going to give you, we have some more code to go through, but we're very quickly coming up upon using the application code and beginning to write our app. So bear with us. And we're going to give you about a 20-minute break right now. If you come back earlier, it's great because we can get through a little bit more, and we are trying to jam-pack a bunch in for you. So why don't we take a break right now, and if folks can be back here by 10:55 at the latest, that would be great. And we'll get started on going through some flow control tools, and then we'll get started on building our CherryPy poll application. Again, if you had any installation issues, if you want to hang around, we can help. If you don't want to hang around, that's okay too. And then we'll be reconvening.
Through more of this material and build our app and get through at least most of building our app, then we need to get back on track, and we got to move really quick. So I apologize for that. You know, it's a lot to cover in 3 hours. It's an ambitious project. So I'm going to quickly blow through the rest of the Python basics, just to get a show of hands. How many of you guys Was I moving? How was the pace? Was the pace too fast? Was it too slow? Okay. All right. So either no opinion or too slow. So I'm gonna speed up.
And I'm gonna keep going around and helping people with
Yeah.
installation issues. So if you could quietly get my attention, I will come sit with you as you're having issues and while Sandy goes through it.
Yep. All right. So let me just. Sorry, I should have noted. I apologize. I should have noted exactly where I left off, and I did not. Talked about while loops. Talked about infinite loops. Okay. So control flow tools. In Python, just like many other languages, we have very similar types of control flow keywords and syntaxes, and in the end, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, regardless of what language we do it in, is we want our application to behave differently depending on what conditions are met or not met. So as soon as this loads up, which hopefully won't take years, if it does, I will go to the PDF, which it looks like I might just, let's give it just a second, but I don't think it's loading. Yeah, PDF time. Okay, this is why we downloaded the PDF at the beginning. Okay, this is not quite as elegant as the Google Docs, but anyway. Oh, see, this is the app, so we're getting close-ish here. Oh, that was weird. I don't know. Okay. So control flows, okay. So in Python we have if, else, and elif. Depending on which condition is met, it evaluates to true within a block of control flow code. We may want our application to behave differently, right? If one thing is true and the other thing is not true, or if no conditions are met, then we might not want anything to happen. Comparison operators, standard, double equals sign is equal to, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Pretty much what you've seen in any other language. So let's try it out. If and else. So age is 20. If age is less than or equal to 20, print you're old enough, right? Simple. Prints you're old enough because age is set to 20. If age is greater than 20, print you're too old, else print you're the right age. Is this, sorry, it seems like weird. Am I doing it wrong again with this? Is it too close to me? Maybe? Or I keep trying to like pull it down. All right, let's try that maybe, further down. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about if and else right now? Probably seen that a million times before. So using elif allows you to expand your control flow block and perform additional comparisons within an if-else statement. So if age is less than 20, print this. If elif age is greater than or equal to 20, print that. So as you can see, the elif allows you to provide a condition, and else does not. Else is just saying, otherwise, do this thing. We don't care what the condition is, whether it's true or not. List comprehensions. List comprehensions are pretty cool. I want to spend a second on those because that might be something that some of you guys haven't seen before or worked with much. So list comprehensions allow us to build lists in a very tidy sort of way. Commonly the way, the other way to build this is a for loop, right? But list comprehensions kind of consolidate that work into pretty much a single line. You can do a lot of stuff inside of a list comprehension, but it's recommended that you keep the logic fairly simple just because it's not necessarily that readable. As you can see, I have user pets, I have a dictionary, which we talked about a minute ago. Yeah, go for it.
Maybe look upwards.
Up here. Like here. Like this. It's okay? All right. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Can't understand. The microphones are hard. So user pets is a dictionary. So you can see the data in there. Sandy has a dog, Katharine has a snake, Bob has a mouse, Sally has a fish. Easy stuff. So I want to get a list of pets out of here. So notice how I'm assigning pet list equals, and I have a square bracket like I would be starting to define a list. That's because I am. But it doesn't become a list until the code inside of it is done executing. It doesn't return, I should say, until the code inside of it is done executing. So for kv in userinfo.itterItems, what that basically means is so V for KV. So value for key value in user info.iterItems, right? So iterItems is a method on a dictionary that allows us to basically access the key and the value at the same time, right? Or gives us access to it in a loop. So we're saying we want to get the value. And the way that this works is inside of the square braces, or the square brackets, we're going to say V is what we want to build out, right? Not K. K is the key, V is the value. We aren't interested in the key. We're interested in the value because we want to get a list of pets, right? And again, we can, oops. So if we looked at, what do we do? Test equals just really, that's happening again. Awesome. Apologize about the weird noise. I don't think I can turn this one off. A, B, C, D, right? So I make a dictionary, test.iter items, right? Right, so it gives me an iterator, an item iterator. We don't go into that in this tutorial. So iterators are a little more advanced concept, I guess, but but I can use this I can apply a loop to this, right? So I don't necessarily have to know how iteritems works to use it. I just know that if I apply it to like a looping structure, I get data out of it. So I don't have to be inside of a list to do this. I can say for KV in test dot, for KV in test dot, right? Print K and V. I'm using a string, I'm using print syntax because I haven't seen before, but comma separated just basically says keep going. I want you to print. So what I did here is I am iterating over the key value pairs in the dictionary and printing them out. So A and B, C and D. So this list comprehension is using the same code, but we have it wrapped here. So what this returns when it's done is we're specifying to build out the value, right, from the dictionary, not the key. Do you have any questions about list comprehensions or so far? I know that's kind of not a whole lot to, yeah.
So you specify K comma V. What if you specify three things that are only one?
Yeah, because there's.
Do you have a terminal? Why don't we try it out?
Yeah, I thought it would complain. I haven't actually tried that. Got K, V, X in test, because there's only two things that it returns. K, V, X. Yeah, more than two values to unpack. So.
And you'll see this a lot of times whenever you're unpacking like any set of tuples or other things that Python will give you that unpacking errors when you have mismatched variables to what you're trying to unpack.
Yeah, it doesn't like that. So, all right. So, yes, sorry. That might be a typo in my, yeah. My apologies, that is not, yeah, I meant to user pets there, sorry. Should I get that fixed when I can access this again, when I can access the slides again. Does anyone else have questions about list comprehensions? We're going to be working with them in the app as well. Yeah?
So, I mean, you're just trying to print values and keys, and I don't get the point of doing list comprehensions. What are you trying to do?
I mean, I sort of just made up this example saying, actually, you know what, let me go to the next example because this might be more relevant. I have another example where we're using control flow and conditionals in list comprehensions. So this is a more practical application. I sort of wanted to use something simple at first to get the concept across, but this is more of a real world example. So what I'm doing here is the exact same list comprehension, but I've added in something new where I'm saying V for KV and user info, and I have the wrong variable name again, apologies. User info.iter items. Oh no, I've called it user info. Never mind. Mixed up on the slides. So I've added though, if K is not equal Bob. So what this is going to do is each time it iterates through the key value pair in the dictionary, right? it's doing a check that says if K, the key, equals Bob, then we don't want to use it, right? So but in the end, what we've built is a list of pets except for Bob's pet. Because if K is not equal to Bob, add it to the list. If K were equal to Bob, which is true one time, don't add it to the list. So you build out, so this is more like really what you'd see if you're in like your web application, you were building using list comprehension to iterate over some sort of data. You would have some logic in there that told you, I want to exclude something or include something generally.
And sometimes you use a list comprehension because what you're dealing with is not a list, and you need to use list functionality. So you need to quickly build a list that you can then use, slicing or something that you couldn't use with something else. So a lot of times, list comprehensions you use because you're looking for some sort of functionality of a list, or you're trying to parse a list using conditionals like this and easily create a list that you can then iterate over. This lists are very fast in Python, and there's a lot of things that you can do with lists that maybe you can not do with other data types. And so a lot of times you'll convert something into a list to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So writing Python functions. So this is definitely something we're going to be doing in the app in a few minutes. I'm going to try to get through this quickly. Simple function, def is the keyword that indicates when I'm beginning a function, right? It's followed by the function name, in this case, hello world, open paren, close paren. Between the parens, you can have parameters, right? In this case, I pass a default argument set to John, and then colon, and again, we're dealing with code blocks, right? Which we talked about earlier, where these lines that are inside of the function definition have to be consistently indented. I have a doc string. You'll see this very commonly. It's basically just a comment, and you can call docstring method on the function and get the docstring to print out, which is probably how IPython does what it does. And all this function is doing is saying hello %s, right? So we talked about string formatting. I'm using string formatting here. And then I'm returning the formatted message based on the username that the function received. If the function receives no username, then it returns hello John, because user equals John is the default value for the user variable. If we didn't have a default value for the user variable and then we tried to string format it, we would get an error, right? It would raise an exception because there is nothing. It's like, user's not there. Whoa, let's do that again. Here I am invoking the method, my message equals hello world, and then I pass in my username because I want it to say custom for me. And then it returns a string, and then I print the string out, and it says hello Sandy. So are there questions? This is a very simple function. The syntax is pretty straightforward. I'll talk a little more in a minute about other types of ways you can pass things into functions. But this is like really simple. Any questions about the syntax or the keyword?
That user is defining default if you give it no arguments?
Yes. Yes, so if I were to just call hello world, open paren, close paren, it would print hello John.
Return hello John.
Yeah, it would return hello John, and then I could print it if I so chose to print it. Yeah. So, any other questions about the hello world function? Okay, cool. Moving right along. So args and kwargs. In addition to single or comma separated arguments, so we could pass in, 50 arguments to a function if we wanted to, but that wouldn't be very pretty, would it? If we need to pass in a lot of arguments or an undetermined number of arguments or keyword arguments, right, then we would use args and kwargs. Args is essentially a list, so I could pass args into a function, and look at this function here, def function, and see how I have this here? It's a little weird to highlight this, but asterisk args means that it's expecting something along the lines of what I have here, he, she, it. It's a list of values, and then the function itself doesn't know what each of these values are. It just knows that it's going to be receiving an iterable that contains things that it will be operating on.
And it doesn't know how long it is. It doesn't expect 3. It doesn't expect 4. It could be a list of 1. So it just expects something to be passed that is an iterable.
Yeah. Similarly, kwargs allows us to pass keyword arguments, which are basically, like a dictionary, right? So me, you, we, they. So then I could reference those things. I could use that type of syntax when I'm working with those parameters that were passed in with quarks. I could treat them, I could reference, keys, right?
And we'll be using this later in the application to handle some of the ways that we save our models.
So does anyone have questions about args and quarks? Sort of as a concept or, yeah? You mean like args, args?
You can pass both args and quarks to the same function. So then it would look for first an iterable and then a
But if you
key.
But if you pass like args.
Oh.
I've never tried that.
I've never seen that.
Actually,
That's
never seen it,
probably
never
bad
tried.
practices.
So a single star means iterable, 2 stars means dictionary?
That's correct.
So you're passing args, you reference them by index, or how you reference them?
I mean, referencing them by index would bring about issues if you didn't know how many you were to expect,
Right.
So usually you would just use an iterative, so
Yeah, just one
some
of the
sort of
methods to
iterative
iterate
method.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, since you know it's an iterable, there's a lot of tools in your toolkit that you can use to work with iterables, and you would use those to manipulate the args that were passed in. Yeah. Generally, hard coding indexes doesn't end well, I guess. Usually, yeah. Anywhere. But.
Or if so, you should delineate how many you expect. So you could say def function foo baz buzz or something like that, and then it would know that to expect 3 right in a row. So,
Does anyone have any more questions on args, quargs, or as a concept, or how they might work?
we will be looking at them later. So
Yeah.
we'll come back.
And a lot of times it helps once you get into like real examples of this stuff. It makes more sense. It's like, oh, that's how you use that. That makes sense. Okay, so a word about import statements. Python has, as I mentioned earlier, extensive standard library, lots of useful stuff, reduces boilerplate code writing substantially. So the import statement allows you to import a module or library, right? In this case, I'm importing the random module. I call it library here. I probably should call it module is a better word, I believe, for that. And I'm going to have the random module, we call randint, right, which is the method that's available to me. And randint will print a random integer between 1 and 5 in this case because I'm passing in 2 arguments. Randint takes 2 arguments. Anyway, this example, whether it's the random library or not, doesn't really matter. The fact is that import statements are how you bring in Python code that you want to use that's not just already defined in the program that you're working with, right? Within the scope of the file that you're working with. So import statements also go at the top of your file is best practice. You should not put import statements, 50 lines in or 100 lines in. You shouldn't put them inside of functions, things like that. Yes?
Question on import. I've seen syntax from blank imports foo, and I
Yes.
have problems with my file where that will pass. Is that
Yeah.
worse and is it a newer feature?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that would be probably a circular import. It's probably what it sounds like, right?
Yeah, I mean, there can be numerous
I-
import errors, right? But it's standard practice to say from the module that you wish to import from, import either the functions or the classes that you're trying to import. So that's standard practice. Here she's using import random because as it's in standard lib, a lot of times you'll just import the entire standard library if you're going to be using numerous pieces of it, because she could have said from random import randint and written it just as fine. Sometimes you run in Python into circular import errors, which is basically when a file that you're importing is importing.
Yeah, like the file, you're importing a file that's being imported from the other file. Basically, they're infinite import type of situation. It's really hard to track down because the types of errors that it gives you in the application are not suggestive of the real problem. Yeah. A lot of times.
How do you deal with a simple import when you make a model and you get this problem that you have simple import? The best practice is to put in the init, importing the init of the model.
No, I think if you look at the application that we're going to be presenting to you, it's pretty standard that, we have helper tools that are used by, maybe all of them, right? And then there are models that are maybe used by the views, right? And then there are views that are maybe used by the controllers and things like that. So there's really easy ways in terms of architecting your application where you don't run into circular import issues.
Yeah, and generally, like keeping your imports really tight is good. Like import what you need. When you're not using something anymore, remove the import statement. Put your standard library imports like RE is regular expression module, right? Random integer manipulation module. Those will go above your personal modules. Like if you had a model class, you put those below the standard library imports as a general practice.
Yeah, you can read up in PEP 8 standards a little bit more about like how to avoid circular imports and what are the best practices.
Exactly. So, let's see here. Python classes, intro to these. Do you want to cover these? Because I don't know if they're in the...
They're not in the application, but we can do a brief overview.
Okay, so just to kind of give you guys an idea of what like a very simple Python class would look like. Let's say I have a module named cars, and then I want to make a class called my car. I'm writing my own class, right? So my car class defines a car object. I have a member variable I have two actually, called make and model. And this is like what my car is, right? So every object that gets instantiated from the my car class is going to have attributes, make and model, and they're going to be Honda and Civic, unless I specify them to be otherwise later, after I've instantiated them. Class methods are methods that belong to a class, right? In this case, I have car color and tire type. So a lot of times, like, these are, functionalities that I would use to manipulate the object. So in this case, I want to be able to use the color module's paint method the car module's paint method to change the color on my car, and then set the color attribute on the object. So if I called, and I have actually an example in a minute to show you guys how to use this, how I would use this, but this is sort of kind of standard the way a class would look. Member variables, member functions, set attributes, get attributes, manipulate attributes, things like that.
Properties and methods, essentially.
Yeah, exactly, properties and methods. So what exactly is a class in Python? Sort of decent definition that I found that was fairly concise is it's a class, it's a construct that's used to create instances of itself called class objects. It defines constituent members, which are data field, like attributes, member variables, like what we saw, attributes, properties, and class methods that give the object state and behavior. Behavior would be like tire type, right? Setting the tire type, changing the color, things like that. But these actually, all they do is they set attributes, they set state on the object. So we're basically saying if I call this method, then I am changing the color on my car. And let's see here, the next slide I kind of show you. So this is what I would do, and I was in the standard Python interpreter just playing around, and so I import my car, the class explicitly that I want, and then I say car equals my car, print car.make Honda, right? And why does that work? Because up here, as you can see, we've got this member variable here, right? This attribute is set. Kind of get the gist. I mean, I'm calling, the car color function, and then I'm saying, okay, what is the attribute set to now? Oh, it's set to black, right? And it's set to black because if you look here, it says color equals black, right? It's default to black. If I'd passed in my custom color, I could change the color. And I can still do that. I can call the method again and change it. In fact, in Python, you can even say car.color equals blah, and it'll just work. That's pretty forgiving. Like, there's not restrictions on accessing those properties, really, so, which isn't really something we need to worry about for today. So be aware of the init method. There's a special method named called init that's implicitly defined when you create a new class in Python. When you instantiate a new object of a particular class. By default, init is empty, right? So in my car class that I showed you guys, I didn't even put an init method there. I don't need it. Whenever I instantiate a car object, that object will have an init method, but there's nothing in there. It's just very vanilla, right? Technically it's there. But there are certainly plenty of cases where you want to override the init method and have it do special things for you. And in that case, you can define an init method in your class, and instead of just being the default vanilla blank init method, it will be your specific instructions.
And this is essentially where, like, for example, in her car class, everybody starts out with a Honda.
Yeah.
But essentially, she could have rewritten it so that init handles something like you're passing it a dictionary of the values that you'd like to set And init could use the quarks variable that we just learned about. And we could do things like, okay, set the make equal to the make in the quarks, set the model equal to the model in the quarks. And that's a lot of times how you'll see Python classes instantiate themselves.
Yeah, and that's not something we need to worry about for the project, but it's interesting to know and to think about. It's good to be aware of. So methods versus functions. I try to keep these straight. I try to call methods methods and functions functions, but I do slip up and misspeak. But technically, a method is belonging to a class, right? So the car color that's part of the my car class, car color method, that's a method. The hello world function, the very first function we looked at, we call that a function. It doesn't belong to a class. Essentially, if a function belongs to a class itself, it's actually called a method. We shouldn't call it a function. We call it a method. However, a standalone function is just called a function. Kind of interesting. I mean, it's kind of more of a trivia thing, I guess. I apologize, not trivia. Proper terminology, that's the word I was looking for. So web coding in Python is pretty fun. It's pretty much the best. So do you want to take over I don't know if you're ready to, do you want me to do this or, okay.
Sure. So we'll get into the application building, but essentially, all right, so web coding in Python is fun, as Sandy says. A lot of the web frameworks follow MVC design. It's a design pattern where we have models, views, and controllers. And as we're saying here, models represent essentially the knowledge, the objects, the classes, and the structure and data of your application. I apologize. The view is the visual representation of the model, right? So a view will tell you what the model looks like, what attributes it has, whereas the controller is essentially the way to a link between the user and system. It allows the user to how should I say? It allows the user to manipulate the views. It allows the user to access the views.
Manipulate the objects.
Yeah, and manipulate the objects before presenting them to the user. So,
yeah.
I mean, it's...
And someone asked me just what a framework was earlier, and just to really quickly a framework is like a web framework, okay, it's basically a collection of code and functionality that makes it so that as a web developer, I don't have to worry about a lot of core critical code that has already been done for me and is part of the framework. Things like URL routing, things like an ORM, like a template engine. A template engine is something that lets you pass data from your controller method back to your view, right? And then your view will pass it into the template. And
so essentially, frameworks do a lot of the lifting for you. As we'll see with the example here, we use CherryPy, which is a micro framework, which means it does minimal lifting for you, but it does do some lifting. So,
yeah.
Okay. So a real world example of MVC the model would be the user. The view would be the profile page, let's say your Facebook profile, right? And the controller would be your change password functionality. So you can reset your password, change your location, all of those types of things, and then it would essentially then also change the view, right? So
the controller
as well as the
manipulates
user
the
object itself, yeah. So, okay, so we won't really be going over it, but WSGI is Web Server Gateway Interface. It's basically the universal way that Python applications speak to web servers. And it allows, basically you to run your Python app somewhere on your server and then have something like Apache or Nginx handle your web traffic. It's pretty standard, and there's a lot of standards on it that you can read about in the Python documentation.
Yeah, it'll definitely be something useful to you if you decide to deploy an application to your website at some point.
And ORM is another term that we've used. It's an object relational mapper. It essentially allows your application to connect to a database or a data store CherryPy doesn't have a native ORM, which is why we're utilizing and leveraging Memcache as kind of a data store. But you can use any number of ORMs, and a lot of frameworks, such as especially the larger ones like Django, have their own native ORM. Any questions before we start working on the project? And it's been kind of like a lot of slammed with a lot of different Python things, but these, of course, are always accessible to you. So if you have questions later, you can revisit them. So you should hopefully have all the libraries installed and working on your computer. We're going to be building a poll web application. You'll be able to create and edit the polls and add and edit choices and vote on the polls, okay? We were gonna have you write out all of these things, but in the interest of time, I think we should open up the CherryPy poll directory that hopefully you cloned from my GitHub. If you don't have Git installed, there's instructions on...
Does anyone not have the code? I'll come around and help you.
Does anybody not have the application
Okay.
code? Just the application code, literally
Yeah.
my repository.
The
Not
CherryPy
necessarily all of the
polls.
libraries, but my repository. So the CherryPy poll application, so we have a file in it called DB tools. And if you guys could open that in your own favorite text editor of choice, we can start going over it. So as you can see here at the beginning, I have an import pylibmc. Pylibmc is the preferred Python library for talking with Memcache. There's another one called Python-Memcache, but that's actually going to be deprecated. So that's why we went with pylibmc. However, given all the installation issues, I now regret choosing just the deprecated one. But it's always good to use the most common libraries and to find out which ones are going to be deprecated. And there's a lot of good chatter on the internet and in IRC channels and other things about which ones are maintained and which ones aren't. So essentially, I have some functions here. My first one is called getMC, which is essentially just establishing my Memcache connection object. So as you can see, I'm calling pylibmc's client, and that is connecting to my standard Memcache portal, right, which is sitting on localhost at 112.1.1. And then it is returning that client. So getMC will return an open client connection to your Memcache, right? Then I have this other function, getValue, okay? And it's going to retrieve the value for a given key. Now this should start sounding familiar, right? Dictionaries, key values, Memcache, key values. So as you can see, I get that initial client connection. Then I set a variable value equal to mc.getKey. I delete the connection object. This is, again, just one of those good practices that we talked about, cleaning up after yourself, closing connections you're not using. And then I am returning a value. So it's pretty standard stuff here in terms of getting data, connecting to data. And I have a couple other functions here. I apologize for. As you can see, I have set value, right? It will set a given key value pair in Memcache. Again, I'm getting it. As you can see, the set syntax is really simple and straightforward. This is, of course, all part of the pylibmc client behavior, right? These are, as we would call them, methods of the pylibmc client object. So mc.set key value. Again, I'm getting that key value from somewhere else that's calling this function, and I have a return true in there. This is some time where you could do some error handling here if you wanted to, and if you were unable to set the value for some reason, you could return none. So these are the types of things that are pretty standard practice in terms of telling the other parts of your application whether the behaviors are properly handled or not. I also have a delete value, right? Which is going to delete that key value pair from Memcache, right? And again, this is all stuff that we kind of went over when we were doing dictionaries. And essentially, Memcache is a dictionary on your local machine.
So you have to call del MC and doesn't just go away without scope?
You know, it probably does. I just, I'm a little bit, I am usually over explicit about removing my connections just because I think it's good standard behavior for using your database connections is that you should be cognizant of having them open and closed. But I would have to run a profiler and see how many connections and what my pool looks like to give you the full scope of that. But I think it's just good practice to be explicit and to understand that when you instantiate connections, you should also just do a good job of removing your connections as well. Especially when if you were to run this like on a large scale application, it's better to not put the onus on Python to do everything for you, to be a little cognizant when you're starting the connections yourself. So I just think it's good practices, but likely it would be fine. Okay, so we have simple, basically ways that we can connect to our local running memcache. We can set values, we can retrieve values, we can delete values, and we are using pylibmc to help us with that, and memcache essentially as our data store. Are there questions about, kind of why we set up this database tools file, or what does this functionality do for an application? Does everybody grok what we're doing here? Yeah, okay, let's move on. Okay, so yes, we are using pylibmc methods, like get, set, and delete. Okay, so utils, this is, as I noted, I believe, stolen shamelessly from the Flask guys, but essentially this is our utils py is where we're going to place our helper functions. And this is, again, how we do things like avoid circular imports. We have one file that's handling database connections. We have another file that's helping utilities, right? And this utils helper function is doing something called slugify. And it's essentially just generating an ASCII-only slug out of any sort of string that we can give it. So we can give it a string. It is doing things like lower and split and encode, which are all string functionalities. And then it is returning a string, right? As you can see, it's the end is returning a string that has been delimited and is joining the result of that. So, so essentially this slugify just allows us to pass in ugly looking questions like this, which are actually pretty, right, for the user, and convert it to something that the database can use, right? So our slugs can become our keys, right, if we take the time to clean them and make them able to be hashable objects for memcache, but also we can have nice things like our pretty symbols in our questions for the front end and still allow us to have URLs and keys that work for our application on the back end. So this is kind of how you begin to start to delineate what do I need for this application in terms of how I want it to look, and then what do I need for this application in terms of how I would like it to function. So that pretty much, yes, notice on the slugify function, punctuation regex, essentially, so Python doesn't enforce public and private variables, but when you are using tools or libraries where people have taken the time to underscore, either with a double underscore or a singular underscore, functions or variables, then it's likely that the intention of that developer in writing it that way was to communicate to you that that is essentially should be respected as a quote-unquote private attribute or a private method. And so in our slugify function, as you can see, when you look before, the punctuation regex is used, is used within the file, and it's defined there, but it essentially is utilized in that way so that you're not importing it into other areas of the application and using it outside of the scope.
Sorry, in this function, what you are doing if word and then appending. So if word is always going to be some value, correct? So what exactly the intention of doing if word? Is it going to return none anytime?
Yes, it will return none if it can't encode properly. So that's essentially what gets rid of like the smiley face at the end.
So this private area, since you're not in the class, just means access it from within this file only?
Yeah, I could utilize it in other places. I could import it using that namespace, right? But it's just more about respecting the intention of the developer on where things should be utilized, less so than the actual, like, you could brute force import it anywhere, right? But
And by importing the namespace, you'd import the file name?
yes, from utils import underscore punct re, right? And just a quick note about normalizing Unicode. As you work with Python more, you'll become more and more familiar with Unicode if you're not already familiar with it. But for the purpose of storing slugs in our database, or our data store, I should say, we just want to have only ASCII characters rather than worry about special characters. Of course, depending on what languages you want to code in and develop in, there's a lot of different Unicode and globalization functionality built into Python. It's actually definitely a strength of the language, so that is helpful. So if you open up initial.json.py, this is the organization essentially of our data within our application. We're not actually using initial.json.py, but if we wanted to instantiate basically an initialization or an import, we could do so. And essentially, we have our poll dictionary, right, which is essentially just a Python representation of our memcache instance. And we have a slug, right, which is our key. And then within it, we have then a nested dictionary, right? So our slug actually returns a dictionary that has different keys like question, slug, choices, and publish, right? As you can see, question and slug and publish are fairly obvious as to what they are. And then when you look at choices, it's actually a list of then nested dictionaries, right? And those dictionaries have, again, key value pairs that are fairly obvious. It has an ID, it has text, and it has a value, right? So you can begin to see how useful and powerful Python dictionaries are as a data type, because here is just 10 lines of Python code, and I can have a question, a slug, the choices, and they're all available Python data types. They can all tell me something about what it is that my application is trying to get at. And they're all really easy to use and manipulate, as we saw when we were doing different things with lists and dictionaries earlier. So, and also, as you can see, it's really, really simple data for an application that in other languages might have a much more complex architecture.
That is valid JSON also?
Yeah, well, JSON in terms of JavaScript parsing JSON would prefer me to use double quotations rather than single quotes. Python doesn't fault me for that, but I believe that JSON. But yes, you could run this essentially. You should put var in front of it and double quotes, and you could run it in JavaScript.
And is this here just to help the reader, or it's being used?
No, it's here to help the reader, but essentially what you could do is you could write an initialization where maybe you're polling, you hit a certain URL and it pre-populates or it pre-generates polls for you, and you could utilize something like this. So in a lot of applications out in the real world, maybe the the developer would like to initialize it with a simple URL request, then you could use something like this to then import it and very quickly initialize your database. But in this, it's more illustrative of just actually showing you what's happening in Memcache. Okay, so models.py file in Python is used to define class types and create and inherit model instances. Okay, in our application, we're essentially using this theory to manipulate our data in the Memcache data store, but usually your models would have classes, right? So usually your models.py file would have a class, it would have all of the class attributes and the class methods, but in this case, to keep things simple, we're actually using our models.py to just add and edit our polls. So here, we can see, this is our models.py, so you can open up the models.py file and read along within your folder. So we have a function called add poll, and it takes quarks. What is quarks again? Dictionary, keyword arguments, right? And then it does a couple things, okay? I guess it creates something called choices array, right? Which is a list. It sets a count variable to 1, and it sets something called a poll dictionary to a dictionary object. All right, so evidently this is going to do something. So then it's setting the poll dictionary question to quarks.getQuestion. What does get do again? Get the value from what? What's the quarks again? The dictionary that we passed in, right? So evidently, and what is get going to return if there is no key called question? None. Okay, so we're using good practices here. Okay, then I'm using something for kv, right? Key value in quarks.items. What does items return again? Key value tuples of a dictionary, right? So now I'm going to iterate over these keys and values, okay? Then I'm doing something if choice, not in K, continue. So if the word choice, and we didn't go over in and not in, but essentially in Python that's going to determine whether something, has that string, in a string sense, in and not in is going to tell me, does the string have the word choice somewhere in it, or does it not, right? If choice is not in there, continue. In Python, I don't think we covered it either, but in a for loop, if you tell it to continue, it's just going to keep going to the next one. It also, Python utilizes break. So if you are looking for just a singular match and then a break, you would use break, right? But if you want to iterate over an entire list and just continue if something doesn't match the conditions that you're hoping for, then you can use continue. So then I'm instantiating a new dictionary called the choice dictionary. And this should start to look familiar now that we looked at that initial JSON. And I'm saying, okay, the ID is equal to count, right, which is initially 1. The text is equal to v, right, which is the value in this choice key value pair, right? And then I'm setting the value equal to 0, right? Then you can see I'm choices array, append, choice dictionary, and instantiating and incrementing the count. So what is this function doing? Essentially, it looks like to me it's taking a bunch of keyword argument pairs, and if it looks like it's a choice from wherever it's getting this data, then it's adding this choices array, which very much mimics the initial JSON choices array that we saw, right? So here's a bunch of choices, and they have these attributes. Choices seem to have an ID, they seem to have text, and they seem to have values, right? And it's creating a list of them. And as it's going through, it's incrementing the ID, okay? If we continue on, once it exits that for loop, we are creating a slug using our utils slugify, and the slug is being created out of that question, right? And then we are setting the poll dictionary slug and choices key to those two things that we've now created, And then we are using our database tools set value to set the slug, the key, equal to our new poll dictionary, right? So now we have all of these different things. We have basically a mirror of the initial JSON that we've set. The final thing that it tests for is if somewhere in the keyword arguments publish is true, because if quarks.getPublished is going to return true or false or none, right? Or whatever the value of it is. But if that value returns true, then I'm calling another function called publish poll, which we will get to later. So, are there questions about this add poll? Because it is kind of doing a lot of different things.
Just to clarify, if I understand, you use the English word not a exclamation point or thing in other languages. Is that how Python?
Not in Python is a thing. So, so yeah, you can literally type not true and it will say false. Say not 0 and it will say true.
Negation.
Yes.
Operator.
So, so yeah, you don't have to use there is also equivalency with the exclamation point, but there's also not. So is and is not are things that you can use in Python to determine.
Keywords that are
Yeah, to determine.
keywords. Does anyone else need does anyone else need the Git repo or help with the Git repo right now? Okay.
Okay. Are there other questions or just even comments about this add poll function and what it's doing and why we're utilizing it? Does it seem to make sense? People getting, okay, we're taking in all of these things. And we'll get to, as you see the application progress, we'll get to a little more of how we're doing it. Okay, so then we have edit poll. And edit poll is, again, taking keyword arguments. And it's, again, instantiating some things like a choices array. But it's calling this get poll function, which is taking in a slug, right, and returning a poll, it looks like. Then it's creating a poll dictionary. And then very, very similarly, and intentionally so, it almost mimics the same add poll functionality, right? Where it is going through the items, it is looking for the choices, but we have a couple things that are different. So where you say, let's go to the line that says this choice equals, and there we actually have a list comprehension. And this choice is C for C in poll.get choices, right? Which is iterating over this list that's choices list. If the integer is equal to C.getID. So essentially what this looks like is, is the choices, the quarks are going to look something like this. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so they look essentially something like this. So if we go back to this, what we're seeing is we're stripping choice, which is going to remove choice and just leave us with the integer, and we're testing whether it's the same as the ID. So essentially, we're trying to keep the choices in order, and the order is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And we're going to create this list comprehension to see if we could find that matching choice in our initial poll when we're editing it, right? So, if not len this choice, okay, so what is that asking us? That's saying, okay, if you didn't find a match for the choice in the initial poll, So we're editing the poll, and for some reason we can't find a match. We're actually going to return false. And this is a good example where we could also have returned none, right? And we could just say, you know, there's some sort of issue with this choice that we can't seem to find it, which is likely a user or a form error that we should handle in some other way. Otherwise, this choice is equal to this choice 0, right? Because the list should only contain one matching ID. Then in your choice dictionary, we are setting the ID, the text, and the value from the initial choices that we found. And then we're appending them to our choices array, similarly to the add. We're setting the slug, we're setting the choices, we're setting the value, and then we're publishing it or unpublishing it depending on that. So as you can see, they have some functionalities. With the edit poll, we are obviously trying to access from Memcache and say, can we find this initial poll that we had that now the user has decided to change the questions? Or maybe they're changing the order of the questions, or maybe they're changing the choices. And with that, then we're trying to find that poll and in Memcache, change it to better represent what the user is telling us it would like it to be. They both obviously have things like the choice dictionary, the slug, the publish or unpublish, right? They both have the availability of, you know, then assigning that value to the Memcache data store. Does that make sense? It's a little, I highly encourage you to start, you know, breaking down this app as you now have it and you have it installed, and you know, you could put in print statements and whatever and kind of take yourself through the steps as you're going through it and kind of start grokking like what is happening and why is it built this way, and also how it can be built better, because there's definitely some bugs in there, intentionally and likely unintentionally. Okay.
Quick question about the strip.
Yeah.
Is it just there as nice to have in case there's white space around the...
Actually, as I was showing you, okay, so, so let's say this is, I don't know, but essentially, let's say,
These go with the number.
so you see, strip is intensely useful for situations like in web apps when you are having maybe the front-end developer that you're working with, or maybe you are the front-end developer, and like me, maybe you don't have as many talents as a lot of great front-end developers, and you have to do things like, oh, let me just call them all choice fields. Then you can do something like this, and in the web application side, your database remains happy, right? Whereas, you know, and your lazy front-end developer, Exhibit A, can simply put choice 1, put choice 2, choice 3, choice 4 inputs on their form, right? Strip, not split.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you could do, oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Oops, sorry, how do I? Okay, so I don't know how to use Mac things. Okay, so we created a models file. We have the two functions. We had the utils file with our slugify. We used some of our get and set from the database tools file. And we want to start looking at views, okay? Are there questions about kind of the models, database tools, and the utilities before we move on to views, which are going to help us manipulate some of this data and actually make it accessible to our web user? Okay, I see some head scratch, so keep thinking about it. I'm here for questions. Okay, so let's start going over the views, okay? So, oops, sorry. Okay, so our first view is called cast vote, which seems pretty important. If you're gonna have a poll, people should be able to vote, maybe, or maybe you just wanna put all the values in and not let people vote, that's okay too. But we have this function called cast vote, and it looks like it needs 2 arguments. It needs a poll key and it needs a choice. So as you can see, the function is trying to find the poll from the poll key. And then it's iterating over those poll choices. Then it's saying, if CID is equal to int choice, right, which is an integer representation of whatever choice is, which means choice might be a string that we're getting from somewhere, then the value, set the value, increment the value 1. Then go ahead and set value of that poll in the database to that new incremented value with that particular choice incremented, and then return the poll, right? So this essentially is taking some of this user input. It's allowing the users to vote and increase the value of that choice that they have selected, right? And then to the application, it's returning back this new poll object that has now 1 more vote for that particular choice, right? Again, it is using these, get and set values from our database tools, right? Which is allowing us to interact with our data store. And it again is also using some of these, things that we've talked about, incrementing values, equivalency, an iterative for loop, right? So these are all things, again, that you'll see in almost every web application that we're utilizing here. Let's go to the next one. There's a function called get global links, right? And this is essentially our site navigation. If you start looking at it, you can see that it returns a list of, again, dictionaries, and they all have names and URLs. So this is really easy little helper view function that can allow all of the templates to get all of the links without us having to have the front-end developer write that into every single template or us write it into every single template. We make Python do the heavy lifting. We only write it once, and then now our nav is available to all of our views, right? It's really easy, simple way to do some things. All right, we have get poll, which we actually saw in our edit poll function, right? We called this from our edit poll function. And it's essentially really easy. It's literally a 2-line function. It says get the value, right, from the data store and return the poll, right? So this is, again, then useful. These are little helper functions that we'll use a lot of different places, right? That allow us to easily manipulate the data. All right. Now we have get polls, right? And get polls doesn't actually require any arguments. It's interesting to note. Essentially, it looks like it's instantiating a list called a poll list, right? And then it is calling the data store and asking for something called published polls. And it's getting the value of that. It says, if not published polls, set the value of published polls equal to an empty array. Okay, so it looks like published polls is an array. And then it's going over published polls, right? If we do have published polls. And it's saying poll is the get value of P, right? Which P must be the keys, right? Because always get value, we're handling keys. And then poll list, append the poll. And at the end, after it's gone through each of those keys of all of the published polls, it is returning the poll list. Why would we need this? Why would we need a list of, why would we need two things, two questions. Why would we need a key value pair publish polls and a list of a bunch of slugs? And also, why would we need a function get polls that retrieves these? Any ideas?
Like a transition, like a session. You add it in the list and then it goes to the main chain.
Okay. We're using memcache. So how many people have used relational databases before? Most of us, right? How is non-relational different than relational in terms of us knowing maybe attributes of all of the objects at once? It does depend on what non-relational schema you're using, but essentially in SQL, I could write something like select star from polls where published equals true, right? That's the SQL of what I'm essentially doing in non-SQL, right? Non-relational, data models. So essentially in memcache, I don't know how many people are familiar with memcache, but you can't just say, hey, memcache, could you tell me all of you that have this attribute? It doesn't work that way, right? So essentially when you're using something more non-relational or like a data store that doesn't have, some of those simple relational models, you're gonna have to start thinking in your application, how am I going to allow myself an accessible list of what is published versus what is not? And one of the easiest things to do is, well, let's throw another key value pair in there, and we're gonna keep track of what's published in our own list. So then we only have to access one place, and then we can create a query set, so to speak, of all of the polls that are then published, right? So it's interesting because depending on what type of apps you build and what structures you may have to work with, whether you are in a constrained environment and somebody has chosen the tools that you need to use for you, or whether you can determine all of them yourself, you sometimes have to approach problems differently. So with this function, what we can see is myself as the data architect of this application, I just determined, you know what, we're gonna have to have a list of published polls in our memcache. And that published polls is going to hold the keys for us that the user has determined are publishable. And then whenever we wanna see a list of all of the polls, we're gonna have to pull that value and iterate over it to find all of the polls and then amass, kind of this application where people can vote on all these different things, right? Does that seem to make sense? We following kind of my odd data architecture logic here? Excellent. Okay, so now we have this publish poll function, which we actually saw as well in our models file, but that we were asking, publish this, don't publish this. So our publish poll is, again, it looks like it takes a key, right, which in our case is a slug, and then it is taking the list of published polls. Again, it seems to be asking if there are no published polls, then create that key value pair in the database. And then it's saying if the key is not in published polls, then append that key, and then set the value in the data store. So essentially it's saying, okay, if it's already in there, do we have to worry about it? Do we need to append it again? No, right? We're just gonna, if we keep appending it every time without testing whether it is already a member of that list, then we're going to have a very long list of published polls, right? And our application will slow down with every run of it. But if we do something like intelligent, like say, okay, only if it's not in there, add it, then we can keep our application fast and speedy, right? Which is what we want for not only our app, but our user, right? Other questions about publishing the poll, getting the polls, voting, casting the vote, any of those view functions? Okay. Now there is something called unpublished polls, which again takes a key. So again, it is instantiating this published polls if it doesn't already exist. And then it's saying if key in published polls dot remove, right? Which I guess is another list function that we have yet to see, but now we are seeing it. And then it is again telling the database, okay, this is the new list of or the data store, I should say. This is the new list of published polls, right? Fairly straightforward.
Yeah, this is a lot of code to look at it in a very short span of time.
So I know, yes, as Sandy aptly put in the slides, somebody must have a question by now. Anyone? Bueller?
How are you going to do it?
How am I going to do what? Have a question? Run the application. Okay. Let's get this bad boy running. Okay, first let's go over configuration. So CherryPy, like a lot of web frameworks, has certain ways that it likes its configuration to be handled. Here we can see we're setting a socket host, a port, and a thread pool. That's essentially telling CherryPy we want it to run at localhost at port 8888. Sorry, most of my ports are taken up by a bunch of other stuff, so I built it to work in my environment. Hopefully you don't have something running there. If not, then feel free to change the port or the host. And it has 10 worker threads, right? So you can start a thread pool for the connections. All right, so let's open app.py. This is how we, as you so aptly put it, make it work, right? So as you can see, we have a lot of imports at the top. We're importing CherryPy from Jinja 2, which is our templating system, right? We're importing a couple different things called environment and file system loader. From our database tools, all of the normal things. From our views, we're also calling, of course, a lot of our views within our application because that's how we let the user interact with the models, right? And then we're also importing os.path, which is essentially a good Python standard lib functionality that allows you to do something like file system transversing and other like file system tools. So as you can see, we're telling it the conf is somewhere in this folder. It's called app.conf. The env is again Jinja 2. As you can see, we're using the Jinja 2, and it is saying from this file system, there's a folder called templates. That's where my templates live. And so that's setting up everything so that CherryPy's life is easier and it knows what we want it to do. And this is basically our only class, right? We have a couple classes in here, but we have something called poll views, right? And we have this funny @ symbol with CherryPy expose, which I think we'll get to in a second.
Yeah, there's
next slide.
Next slide.
And then we have this method of this poll views class called index, right? Which is again called by any instance of this class. And it has a data dictionary, right? Title, links, and polls. And then it has a template, which is telling Jinja 2, get this template. And then it's returning template.render with the data dictionary that we just created. So there's a lot of things going on here. And this is where we really start getting into Python as a web application language. Okay, so let's start talking about them. The @CherryPy expose, and do keep, you could use this to reference, but do keep the code in front of you because it's very useful to have both side by side. So the @ symbol indicates that this is a Python decorator. This is essentially syntactic sugar in Python that allows you to, basically CherryPy or other libraries that you use will allow you to have these decorators that essentially call the expose function for that method, right? So what might, just out of curiosity, what might CherryPy.expose do? What do you think it might do? Maybe it exposes, I see some people answering it to themselves, maybe they don't like sharing with the class, but essentially CherryPy expose is going to expose this route to the CherryPy server. So CherryPy is this application server and it's running, and you know, CherryPy is going to ignore anything that's not exposed to it, right? And so this expose decorator is our way of telling the CherryPy application engine, it's our way of saying, hey, you know what, pay attention to this view. This is my index. I want you to see this so that you can execute this code when somebody hits index, right? So that's all expose is doing. And CherryPy has a lot of wonderful decorators. You can instantiate what methods you allow. You can expose things to different users. You can only expose things to authenticated users. These are all types of things that CherryPy allows you to do, and numerous other Python web frameworks allow you to do through very simple commands. Just this simple one line sets up that route and exposes it to your server environment. All right. Let's move on to the next one. env.getTemplate polls.html. Okay. What this is doing is using some excellent methods of Jinja 2. And Jinja 2, we're telling it, all right, we told you where our templates were. That's when we instantiated env, right? We said env at the very top was equal to our templates folder. And if you look really quickly in your templates folder, is there a file called polls.html in there? Yeah, right?
Inside of the repo, yeah.
Yeah, so this is saying, okay, for the index view, this is the template I want you to use. So when somebody hits index, first I want you to go grab this data, and then I want you to go grab this template, and then I want you to template.render data dictionary. Now what might this mean?
Take the template file, this variable, and then pass the object, render it in the template.
A++. So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, I created this data dictionary for you. This is all the things that I think you need to show the user right now. And I want you to use this template, which I've already told you is the polls.html, and I want you to make it visible and expose it to the router. So let's really quickly take a look at the polls.html just so we can fully grok everything that's going on right now. And I think it's later, right?
Yeah, I think kind of completing the picture is we need to see what templates do and how they work and be able to relate what's inside of the data dictionary to what the template looks like and sort of the types of logical operations you can perform inside of a template thanks to the Jinja 2 template engine. So here's polls.html.
Okay, so essentially it's looking for a title, right? Which we told it. It's looking for 4p in polls, right? Which we told it was that list of published polls, right? We grabbed them. And then it's looking for L in links, right? And as you can see, when you start to look at Jinja 2, does this start to look like Python almost? There's certain things that are similar, right?
Yeah, we've got for loops, and we're able to access attributes on objects, right? We're iterating over a list of poll objects, and we're accessing the slug attribute and the question attribute on the poll objects.
And so you can see that polls have this p.slug, which we already knew, right, because we were looking through our database models. And it has p.question, right, which we already, again, knew from our database models. And then links, it looks like, has those URL names. Links, remember, was when we said get global links, right? And we very quickly made a dictionary that had URLs and names so that we could have a global footer nav, so to speak, across all our templates.
Yeah.
So this is where it starts to come together, where it's all of this Python and this backend that we've been learning, and why use a dictionary and why use lists. And this is where you can start to see the power of dictionaries and lists, especially when put together. Because we can iterate over something, and yet we have all of these values that are available to us in these iterable dictionaries, right? Is this starting to make sense? Does the polls view begin to start to come to light? Okay.
This is too long, answer it later, but how, if you're reading Python, how do you get around understanding, comprehending what is in a poll that you can access? So type information coming to you, you have to go 3 or 4 files to get it.
Yes, so essentially normally in your models.py, you would have a class, and that class would have maybe all of not only the methods, right, which is the things that you can call functions within that class, but you would also have a list of attributes, right, which is essentially why I included the initial JSON so that we could start to get a view of what our data looks like. But normally when you're using, you know, a more robust framework, or when you're using, when you're deciding to instantiate your own classes, then what you'll do is you'll set up all of those properties beforehand, all of those attributes to your class. So there's one place where you can go and look at it.
Yeah, and you wind up with, you know, especially if you're using like a relational database, you have constraints, and then your models are defined with those constraints defined. And then if like a framework like Django, for instance, will enforce restrictions on your usage of those objects based on the way that the model is defined. And if we wanted to plug something like SQL Alchemy into CherryPy, which I'm assuming we could do that, then you'd have some of that robustness coming through and more like error checking, validation. But we just sort of rolled our own really simple ORM, which is kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, I think essentially what we wanted to do is we wanted to give you something that you could, you know, kind of like poke and tap at and make better, rather than overly architect something that maybe was less easy to very quickly manipulate.
Gives you a deeper understanding of how things are actually, oh, I'm sorry. I realized we weren't done with that.
Yeah, well, we skipped forward to look at things.
Got it. Sorry.
So let's go back to our app.py. Okay, so are there any questions about how we initially rendered that first view? Do you want to see the view? All right, so how do I?
I'll do
Yeah,
it.
I don't know, you drive. So essentially you could do this also on your own setup. Okay, so you should be in the CherryPy polls folder. If you have everything set up properly, if you're using virtual env, you should be in your virtual environment. If you forgot how to get to your virtual environment, you could just type work on and then the environment name that you call. But if you're not using virtual env, that's fine. And then literally in this folder, all you have to do is run python app.py. You should see something like this.
Right.
This is CherryPy telling you that it has started.
And it pulls this right from the conf file that we defined, running on localhost 8888, right?
So then you should be able to navigate your browser to 127.888.
Let's see. Mod in. Hang on.
Again, you don't need internet for this, luckily. It's just on your local host. So if the internet's slow, it still works. Okay, and look, we have welcome to the poll application, okay? And I believe if you click poll list, this is literally the polls view that we have. Why do we have no polls here? It's empty. Why? What should we do? Add a poll. Okay, do we want to do it on the app side first or in real life? Do we want to look through the application code first or do we want to do it in our browser first? Browser, okay.
Sorry, are we getting cut off here, or like, is it the, did I step on something?
So, is this thing on?
Oh. Okay. Yeah, it is there, yeah. So bittersweet, right?
Just when I was going to create a poll.
The big payoff
All I
was-
wanted to do. If you're running it locally, feel free to go ahead and add your own poll.
I'm adding a poll right now. Let's see, what should I add?
What?
I know the answer to this one. Ooh, that's gonna be it. No, you know what? I'm not gonna do this one. It's gonna slow.
There, yeah.
There.
Publish it.
All right, so
Wait, don't forget to click publish.
there you go. Should I wait to click add, or is it a thing?
Add times. Just turn this monitor around.
Do you want me to add it, or should I wait to see if this comes back on? Or are people kicking this out?
Add it, I guess.
Oh, I'm gonna click add. Oh, weird, look what it did. Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it just refreshed the page.
Very nice. What time is we on? I don't know.
I thought, sorry.
It was 3 hours and 20 minutes. I think we're not done till 3. So,
Oh, we're live.
oh yeah, we're back for a second, I think.
So, we added a poll. If you click on poll list. So, our poll is called, what is the best programming language ever?
Notice the sweet slugification of the
In the
question.
URL.
Yep, that question mark's totally gone, right? Just as it should be. Should we vote for Ruby?
Ruby, Python, Java, or Perl? I think the Python.
I think I better vote for Python because there's more of you guys here than there are me. Just kidding. I love Python. Okay, so I'm going to vote on it, and that's awesome.
You're going to see that we now have a list of the votes. Python is now 1.
Yeah.
So we do obviously have a lot more slides. We're sorry that we couldn't get to all of them.
Yeah, we had 40 more.
We do also highly encourage you to review the tutorial. There's a QR code over there. There is a link. I am KJam on Twitter and Freenode. This is Sandy Mahalo on Twitter and Freenode. We are here to help you. I hope you have fun playing with the application. I'm really sorry we couldn't walk through more of the app code, but I hope you got your first kind of taste of Python and Cherry Pie, and we'll be, kind of hanging out to the side and outside if you have any questions or comments for us. And please do. I do have in the slides some application homework. I highly encourage you to do so.
Yes.
Please break the application, make it better.
We also talk about testing
and we'll be here for all of PyCon, so come say hi to us later. We really, really appreciate you coming, and thank you so much. Appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thanks, guys.